Familiar with the great state of Texas. And then, of course, we have Mr. David Byer, the Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute. Gentlemen, welcome to the hearing. I'm going to make an opening statement, yield as much time as I may need. I'll try to just talk through this a little bit. The American people, I think, at this point, are as familiar on this issue as any with respect to the wide open borders in the United States and the epic humanitarian disaster that has ensued as a result, and the greatest national security threat to the American people is posed by these open borders. So the social cost, I think, has been well in front of the American people consistently. But I don't think we've talked enough about the financial burden to taxpayers and the fiscal impact. FAIR has done a great job. I've seen studies that suggest the cost is upward of $400 billion. Their cost estimate is at $150 billion. The lion's share of that cost is borne by state and local governments. And friends, state and local governments can't borrow or print money like the federal government. And so they're having to balance their budgets by either absorbing this cost through raising taxes, or they're having to cut services to their citizens. The $150 billion, when you look at the 22 million people that are estimated to be in this country illegally, comes out to about $9,000 tax dollars per illegal immigrant. So I want you to listen. I want everybody to listen to this stat. $9,000 roughly per illegal immigrant that taxpayers are fronting. That's more than we spend per Medicaid beneficiary. That's more than we spend on the most vulnerable American citizen for their health care. That's more than we spend for our heroes, our veterans, in the way of military retirement benefits. So I think for everyone, this should be unacceptable. I believe it is quite avoidable, but this is the real and significant, and at the state and local levels, especially unsustainable cost of the current border crisis. Texas, in my home state alone, we've spent over $13 billion, which is about $4,500 per illegal immigrant in Texas. Just to give you an example or sample list of services we're providing for people who are here illegally, it's about $3 billion extra dollars for Head Start. At the state level, it's $70 billion across the United States for public education. And states have a very difficult time prioritizing and investing in public education because of the cost of health care and now the cost of illegal immigration. You look at criminal justice, it's about $12 billion extra in criminal justice cost across the United States. Tens of billions of dollars in uncompensated care at hospitals. We talk all the time as a committee about how health care costs are driving our deficits and national debt. Medicare alone is $1 trillion, and that will double over the next 10 years. And we've got tremendous cost, and that's not to even consider the crowding out of our citizens who are in need for these spaces in hospitals, seats for our students in their schools. So it's real, and we've quantified it, and I'm grateful for the work of FAIR. I think I would say at a time when we have record deficits, the highest level of indebtedness in our nation's history, surpassing a time of war when we're in relative peace and prosperity, at a time when our fellow Americans are spending now about $1,300 more a month because of the inflation tax, where we're looking at an economy teetering on recession. We've seen inflation uptick the last month. We saw the first quarter GDP not even get half of its expectation, I'm concerned about it. But then you're going to add $150 billion in unnecessary cost because of illegal immigration. Now, let me say something, and I'm done about CBO. CBO talks about the benefits of immigration. And let me be clear, we need legal immigration. Legal immigration is a hallmark of the American experiment. The new blood hungry for opportunity and freedom and the American dream. There's nothing more American than that. There's nothing more un-American than lawlessness and chaos and the lack of respect for rule of law. That's all I'm trying to contrast here. But here's what CBO does, and it ticks me off, actually. They take into consideration some of the benefits of illegal immigration in terms of jobs filled and revenue as a result, and some taxes paid, by the way. That $150 billion is the net after we back out about $30 billion in taxes. What I would like to submit to my colleagues is that CBO, in order to do their job to provide the full picture and accurate information for us as lawmakers to make the decisions and value judgments, is to have the full net cost, and that $150 billion is in no CBO analysis whatsoever. But the benefits are. Seems a little odd to me, seems biased to me, and I'm going to make sure, as long as I'm chairman, that that full picture is represented so my Democrat colleagues and my Republican colleagues and us as a committee can just deal with the facts and make decisions and accordingly. With that, I appreciate you, again, witnesses, taking time to provide your counsel and insight at this very important hearing, and I'm going to turn it over to my friend and ranking member, Mr. Boyle.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and like you, I thank the witnesses for taking time to be here today out of your busy schedules. I want to do a few things in my opening remarks. First is to make clear how proud I am that we are, as President Kennedy once wrote in his book, a nation of immigrants. More than 90% of the American people, myself included, are descendant of immigrants. In my case, it's my father who came here from Ireland when he was 19 years old, looking for economic opportunity, as well as my mother's parents, who sailed here on the SS George Washington right after the Second World War. Their story is like millions and millions of American families who worked hard, played by the rules, and in doing so were able to provide more opportunities for their children than they had themselves. My family's been able to live the American dream. And you know, if you go back to the very beginning of the nation, almost 250 years ago in my district at Independence Hall in Philadelphia, if at that time you had said, you know, we're going to build a new country, but we're not going to build it of the elite or the affluent of Europe or any great power. No, this new country on this continent is going to be comprised by those who are on the bottom rungs of the ladder in societies where they come from. And we're also going to add on to that slavery and build the nation with slaves and then the descendant of slaves. And oh, by the way, that nation is going to go on to become the wealthiest, most powerful, and greatest nation on the history of the planet. Would you really have believed if one of our founders said that to you in the late 18th century? But that's who we are as Americans. And I know there is a lot of rhetoric going around right now about immigrants, and I'm not accusing the chair of participating in this, but there are some who irresponsibly delve into the bashing of immigrants. Unfortunately, that has also been around as long as the American Republic. What was wrong then and is wrong now. So to be clear, I am proud that we are a nation of immigrants. As Congressional Budget Office has verified, immigration will add $7 trillion to our economy and lead to an additional $1 trillion in tax revenue over the next decade. Those countries and economies that are shrinking, particularly in Western Europe, wish they had the benefit of America's immigrants. It's sometimes said that America has an immigration problem. The countries that have an immigration problem are those countries to which no one wants to go. America does not have an immigration problem. We do, however, let me be clear, currently have a real challenge on our southern border. No, this did not begin in this administration or the last several years. It actually began about 20 years ago during the George W. Bush administration. 2004, 2005 is when we first began to see a real surge at the southern border. Our peak year before COVID was 2019, a fact that some like to forget. Of course, once we hit March 2020, we had a dramatic drop of crossings at our southern border. Once the pandemic ended and America's robust economy returned, we have seen that surge reoccur. So there is bipartisan agreement, I think widespread agreement across America. We have a particular problem at our southern border of illegal crossings. Now, some months ago, actually last September, President Biden and Senate Democrats worked with Senate Republicans, and over months of negotiations that were very difficult, in good faith, a bipartisan agreement was reached. It would have been the toughest and fairest set of reforms to secure the border in 2 generations. It would have provided $20 billion for border security, hired 1,500 new CBP officers, and funded more than 100 additional immigration judges. That way, those claiming asylum could have had their cases heard right there. And the overwhelming majority of asylum cases tend to be rejected. And in those cases, those folks would have been returned to their country of origin. It also would have provided the machinery that we need for better detection of fentanyl at ports of entry, a specific concern of mine. It would have given the president new authority to go after fentanyl traffickers, some of the worst of the worst. And it would have expanded legal pathways for migrants to work and support their families, those who are following the rules. But what happened? Unfortunately, more than a few Republicans were more concerned with doing Donald Trump's bidding than they were concerned about fixing the problem. Donald Trump didn't want the border fixed because he wanted the issue. And don't take my word for it. Let's see what the leader of the Senate, Republican, said. And I will quote him. That's Mitch McConnell. He said, quote, "Trump didn't seem to want us to do anything at all." Another Republican senator said Trump, quote, "doesn't want us to solve the border problem because he wants to blame Biden for it." So to quickly recap, step 1, Republicans demanded a border deal. Step 2, they negotiated a border deal. Step 3, when Trump ordered them to, they killed that border deal. And finally, step 4, here we are holding a hearing about how bad the border is. It is time to stop playing politics with this very important issue. Let's actually finally get back to a bipartisan solution to fix this American challenge. And with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and in the interest of time, if any other member has an opening statement, I ask you to submit it for the record. We'll hold the record open to the end of the day to accommodate those members who may not yet have prepared written statements. Once again, I'd like to thank the witnesses for their time. The committee's received your written statements. They'll be made part of the formal record. You will have each have 5 minutes to deliver your oral remarks. Ms. Kirchner, I yield 5 minutes to you.
Thank you. Chairman Arrington, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to speak today on the impact the border crisis is having on our nation. My name is Julie Kirchner, and I am the Executive Director of FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform. With 45 years of experience and expertise, FAIR is a national nonprofit that seeks to educate Americans on the impact of mass immigration and to advocate for policies that serve our national interests. For over 3 years now, Americans have been watching an unprecedented crisis unfold at our borders. So many illegal aliens are arriving that our immigration system is beginning to collapse under its own weight. The chaos is imposing record costs on Americans. Last year, FAIR published a report entitled "The Fiscal Burden of Illegal Immigration on United States Taxpayers." The study strives to illustrate the myriad of ways Americans pay for illegal immigration. Our estimate, which we believe is a conservative one, is that Americans now pay $150.7 billion annually due to illegal immigration. This figure represents a net cost. In terms of gross expenditures, we estimate that Americans pay $182 billion. Then, approximately $31 billion is received in taxes from illegal aliens, only 17% of the costs they create. The high cost of illegal immigration is due to several factors. First, because illegal aliens usually have low incomes, those who do pay taxes pay little, if anything. Second, illegal aliens incur significant costs to the taxpayer on a daily basis because public services such as policing, K-12 education, and emergency service are provided universally. Further, due to loose eligibility criteria, intentional and otherwise, many illegal aliens receive benefits from federal and state programs, despite the fact that they have no legal status. The majority of costs are incurred at the state and local level. The predominant cost for states is K-12 education. We estimate it costs Americans roughly $70 billion each year to educate children who either have no legal status or who are the US-born children of illegal aliens. The second highest cost to states is medical expenditures, which we estimate to be approximately $22 billion annually. The impact of the border crisis is being felt acutely in both border states and destination states. We can look to New York City as a good example, where over 180,000 migrants have settled and 30,000 migrant children have enrolled in New York City public schools. Mayor Eric Adams now anticipates the border crisis will cost $10.6 billion through the summer of 2025. The situation is being replicated in cities across the country. And these local costs for food and shelter and other costs that are not well documented are not incorporated into our report. This means that taxpayers are paying much more than we estimate. But Americans need not be paying billions of dollars as a result of illegal immigration. This is a man-made crisis. From the moment the Biden administration took office, it tore down all programs and policies designed to deter illegal immigration and began to release illegal aliens en masse. The Biden administration has also proactively taken steps to help illegal aliens obtain benefits. This has been accomplished through a variety of means, but in particular through illegal parole programs and the retroactive granting of temporary protected status. Let's examine the administration's parole program for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. Many people don't realize that this program has an immediate and significant cost to taxpayers. Upon being paroled into the United States, these aliens who have no legal status immediately become eligible for work permits, Social Security numbers, Obamacare, and will be able to attain valuable tax credits such as the Earned Income Tax Credit and the Additional Child Tax Credit. On top of that, parolees are eligible for federal benefits on the same terms as legal permanent residents. That means after a 5-year waiting period, they may receive benefits under all the major federal benefits programs: Medicaid, Social Security, Supplemental Security Income, food stamps, temporary assistance for needy families, and federal student aid. And that's assuming they otherwise qualify. For Cubans and Haitians, however, the 5-year waiting period is waived by statute. So that means that Cubans and Haitian nationals brought to the U.S. through the President's parole program are immediately eligible to receive all federal benefits. This happens before they even file a tax return, and despite the fact that they have no legal status. Members of the committee, over the past 3 years, between 9 to 10 million illegal aliens have been encountered at our borders. On top of that, approximately 1.8 million illegal aliens are counted as gotaways. And there's no end in sight. If we do not reverse course now, if we do not change our current policies, the numbers will only grow and the costs will only increase. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Kirchner. Now we will yield 5 minutes to Mr. Blair for his opening statement.
All right, dear Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member Boyle, and distinguished members of the committee, good morning, and thank you for inviting me to testify before you. As a senior fellow at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, I bring 22 years of military experience and a deep understanding of border security from my time in the Army and U.S. Border Patrol. My roles have ranged from infantry officer in Operation Lone Star to collateral intelligence agent and also Marine Border Patrol agent. Today, we stand at a pivotal moment in the history of Texas, facing unprecedented challenges that threaten the very fabric of our state and nation. Texas shares 1,254 miles of border with a failing state, besieged by an authoritarian regime that not only sponsors terrorism, but also allows cartels to wield a spectrum of warfare, undermining the rule of law and jeopardizing the safety of our communities. The Mexican cartels are foreign terrorist organizations and have extended their nefarious operations beyond the border, infiltrating every major city and many towns across Texas. The threats we face are not isolated. They are intricately linked to global adversaries, including state actors like China, Russia, and Iran, and non-state entities such as Hezbollah, Hamas, MS-13, and Tren de Aragua. For example, the Chinese Communist Party has weaponized the Mexican cartels and used them as proxies in their drug warfare on American society. The CCP is supplying the cartels with precursor chemicals and synthetic drugs, such as fentanyl. The Mexican cartels have built a Silk Road from Mexico across the border and into every state, county, and community in the United States, enabling the CCP's insidious strategy of drug warfare. The federal government's deliberate inaction to counter the national security threats has not only exacerbated the border crisis, but the federal government is actively weaponizing mass migration and disinformation to erode the very foundations of our sovereignty and stability. This manufactured humanitarian catastrophe has overwhelmed the federal agencies, leaving them unable to fulfill their primary mandate of protecting the American people. As a result, Texas has been left to fend for itself against an unrelenting invasion of complex and evolving threats that threaten the fabric of our society. The federal government has broken the compact between the United States and the states. The executive branch has a constitutional duty to enforce federal laws protecting states, but it has failed to do so. The preamble of the Constitution outlines the chief responsibility of the federal government to ensure domestic tranquility and provide for the common defense. Article 4, Section 4 provides the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against an invasion. Despite these clear mandates, the Biden administration has not only failed to secure our borders, but has actively undermined the efforts to states like Texas to protect their citizens. The administration's unlawful and unconstitutional commitment to the UN's Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration prioritizes humane migration over the rule of law. Recently, a total of more than $7.4 billion in U.S. tax dollars has been allocated to the State Department for migration and refugee assistance in FY24. This staggering sum highlights the administration's misplaced priorities, focusing on facilitating mass migration rather than securing our borders and protecting our citizens, all funded by Congress. The Department of Homeland Security has neglected its primary mission, as outlined in the Homeland Security Act of 2002, by prioritizing the facilitation of weaponized migration and importation of millions of foreign nationals into the U.S. DHS has failed to secure the border. DHS's own definition of security is as follows: the collective use of programs, plans, procedures designed to protect the nation's citizenry and infrastructures from malevolent attack and ensuring the continuation of normal operations. For these reasons, Governor Abbott has declared an invasion under Article 1, Section 10, Clause 3, to invoke Texas's constitutional authority to defend and protect itself. The consequences of DHS's failure are evident in the staggering data on opioid and drug epidemics' impact on Texas. Just this week, Austin Travis County Emergency Medical Services responded to a total of 75 overdose cases from Monday to Wednesday evening this week, resulting in 9 overdose deaths. Typically, the county only sees 2 to 3 overdose deaths a day. Our economic impact, $50.1 billion each year towards the opioid crisis. Hospitals are facing $202 per capita of costs associated with this, and those with the loss of life, $706 per capita of cost. The fact that this same federal government acts more forcefully now against Texas than it ever has against the Mexican cartels and the border security crisis tells you that everything you need to know about what we face today. We don't just have a crisis at the border, we also have a crisis of constitutional governance. In closing, I implore this body to commit to the utmost priority of protecting our citizens. The future of our great nation depends on our focus against this common enemy. May history remember this day as the essential moment when our nation united to end the Mexican cartels, all national security threats emanating from the border, protecting American citizens, and secure a brighter future for generations to come. Thank you, and I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Blair. Now, we will yield 5 minutes to the pride of Kinney County, Texas, my friend, Mr. Brent Smith.
Thank you, members, for holding this hearing. President Reagan once said, "A nation that cannot control its borders is not a nation." As I sit before you today, I can attest to the fact that we no longer have control of our borders. We have surrendered it to criminal cartels, and in doing so, have jeopardized our own national security. To give this topic the importance it deserves, one might argue that this hearing should take place on the banks of the Rio Grande. While doing so would jeopardize the personal safety of each one here, it would at least provide this committee with a firsthand experience of what Texans are living like every day. Kinney County shares 17 miles of border with Mexico and is located between Del Rio and Eagle Pass. While the jurisdiction of my office may be limited geographically to Kinney County, you can be certain that the facts of my testimony expand well beyond its borders and apply to every county along our southern border with Mexico. For Texas living on the border, words cannot adequately describe the conditions on the ground. Our homes are being broken into in the middle of the night. The main street of our small towns are now a place of high-speed car chases with cartel smugglers. Walking outside on your own property after dark is no longer safe. To put it plainly, Texans no longer enjoy the safety and security of a sovereign border. Kinney County has a population of only 3,200 residents, most of whom are farmers and ranchers. In the year 2020, the county reported 134 criminal charges for prosecution. This drastically changed in 2021 after President Biden issued multiple executive orders revoking numerous border security policies that DHS was operating under to successfully secure our border. Shortly thereafter, criminal cartels seized control of our border and imposed their own policies that would allow their criminal enterprises to thrive. In 2021, the number of criminal charges increased from 134 during the previous year to 2,708 in 1 year. In 2022, this number exploded once again to 6,800 criminal charges in the county. In 2023, there was 5,826 criminal charges, all beginning at 134. Kinney County normally operates within a $6 million annual budget. However, the open border policies enacted by the Biden administration has required that the county to significantly expand the capacities of our local criminal justice system, costing Texas taxpayers an additional $10.5 million. Perhaps, however, the most significant cost that we have sustained during this border crisis is the loss of the safety and security we once enjoyed as Americans. In order to protect the safety of students attending the public school from the threat posed by high-speed car chases with cartel smugglers, the school administration was forced to erect military-style vehicle barricades around its own campus. On at least one occasion, the smuggled occupants of a vehicle breached these barriers on foot and attempted to enter the school while the campus was on lockdown. In another incident, a county resident was forced off the highway during her commute to work when a human smuggler shot her vehicle multiple times in an effort to avoid capture by law enforcement. This resident was forced to quit her job due to the danger she subjected herself by simply commuting to work. The unmistakable sound of a helicopter in flight in Kinney County now causes families to bring their children inside the home and shelter in place until law enforcement gives an all clear. What dollar amount do you assign to the loss of safety and security? I'm not certain, but I do know the cost is very high. In an effort to provide adequate warning to residents of an ongoing law enforcement pursuit, a county-wide text alert system has been in place, which undoubtedly has saved many lives. Even with such proactive measures in place, 2 tax-paying residents have died because emergency medical services were not available when they were needed the most. On both occasions, all available paramedics were deployed to human smuggling events miles away and were unable to respond to the county resident. This is a clear example of how an open border policy has deadly consequences for Americans across this nation. The violence and lawlessness occurring on our border is not sustainable for any sovereign nation, let alone a Texas county comprised of 3,200 citizens. Make no mistake, the willful neglect of this administration's refusal to enforce the laws of our nation have compromised the safety and security of not only Texans, but every American. Texans should not have to bear the financial burden of securing the border while this administration actively undermines our efforts to protect our own citizens. However, we have a sacred duty to preserve those liberties we inherited from others who paid the ultimate price. Texans have never backed down from a fight, and we will not begin to do so now. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman from Texas, and now yield 5 minutes to Mr. Beer. I'm sorry I mispronounced your name earlier. Beer rolls off the tongue as a Texan a lot easier than Beyer, so it's Beer, right?
That's right, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Beer, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member Boyle, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For nearly half a century, the Cato Institute has produced original research showing that free markets and individual liberty make the United States a wealthier, safer, and freer country. In a free society, markets incentivize people to contribute to the welfare of others. Thanks to freedom, America isn't a fixed pie, it's a growing one. It is exactly for these reasons that so many people from around the world come here. And for these same reasons, we should let them come legally. America has never needed immigrant workers like it needs them now. Population growth is down 90% from its historic highs. America's 9 million open jobs are costing the U.S. economy more than $500 billion in economic output per year. And we need immigrants to fill them. The U.S. prime age employment rate is already at near record highs, and more Americans are retiring than entering the job market. As a result, 100% of labor force growth is now coming from immigrants. The Congressional Budget Office just found that the recent increase in immigration, almost entirely, unfortunately, from illegal immigration, will increase the size of the economy by $7 trillion, increase tax revenues by $1 trillion, and cut deficits by about $1 trillion over a decade. The National Academy of Sciences' seminal 2017 report on the fiscal effects of immigration on federal, state, and local finances found that immigrants reduce deficits both in the short and long term. Last year, Cato published a 250-page update of that report and found that immigrants pay $1 trillion in taxes, $300 billion more than they receive in benefits. Even low-skill immigrants who arrive early enough in their careers are fiscally positive in the long term. Studies that claim to find otherwise simply ignore most of the direct and indirect revenues that immigrants create. Of course, every immigrant is not always and everywhere fiscally positive, but the big picture is clear. Immigrants are makers, not takers. Congress should be exploring how to permit immigration in a lawful and orderly way to maximize these potential benefits. Unfortunately, America is benefiting from immigration in spite of Congress's dysfunctional legal immigration system, which was last updated in 1990. Backlogs and delays are now so extreme that literally in any other area of law, there'd be daily hearings and investigations about them. Just 3% of the applicants for legal permanent residence this year will be approved. Most of the people who are currently applying for legal permanent residence will die before they or their family members have the opportunity to immigrate legally. Our legal immigration system is mostly ignored here, but its message that the way to come is to come illegally is heard around the world. As long as we continue to proclaim this message, we will continue to incur some costs related to illegal entries. The only way to change the message is to change the law. That may be hard, but if we start with the accurate premise that these immigrants can be contributors, we can skip the contentious arguments over how to keep out everyone who's trying to come here and focus on the solvable issue of how they can come legally and contribute. Free Border Patrol to keep out real threats. Let people not be forced to hand over their life savings to cartels. Let them line up transportation, housing, and jobs in advance of their arrival. Let them come legally. And if you don't want them to have any welfare benefits, I'm fine with that. Fixing immigration only requires faith in America, in our markets, in our Constitution, in our freedom. And if you ever lack that faith, talk to those who are Americans by choice. Immigrants will tell you that they believe in America. We should listen. Thank you.
Mr. Beard, thank you for your comments. We're going to move to the Q&A portion, and I'm going to yield 5 minutes to start us off. And I just want to respond to some of your comments because I believe in free people, free markets, and free and sovereign states. Freedom without security is complete anarchy. Freedom without rule of law is chaos. And so there are things we can do, and I agree with you. There are places that are broken that should be fixed within the immigration framework in our laws, and there's no doubt there are ways to do that even on a bipartisan basis. But when the President of the United States in his first day repeals and rescinds Remain in Mexico and interior enforcement and holding sanctuary cities accountable for enabling illegal immigration, when that happens on day one and then 93 other executive actions within the first 100 days to unravel the programs that were effective in reducing illegal immigration and effectively securing our border, that looks like a willful and intentional act to create chaos. So yes, there are ways to fix the current system, but I can't accept the fact that the President of the United States, through this Section 212F, which is the broadest of authorities I know of, it says, if you, Mr. President, think this is in the interest of the United States to turn anyone around for any reason, you can do that.
Can I ask, where do we go from here?
Well, where we
If
go,
not
where we
reform the system, where do we go from here?
where we start is to do that which we can with the authority and tools we have. And we saw very clearly in the last administration, where there's a will, there's a way. Doesn't mean it's perfect, doesn't mean there aren't things to fix, but you can't have, in the last month of the Trump administration, 1,000 a day, and then this last December, 10,000 a day of people coming across illegally. To your point, if people think they can come illegally, they will come. Just this week, President Biden and the administration rolled out a rule to give $9 billion worth of health care to people here illegally. You get what you reward. You're an expert on free markets. Incentives drive behavior. We are putting incentives out there intentionally that are creating this, and there's a cost to society, especially, and more so than the financial cost, all of the folks on the terrorist watch list, all of the drugs, all of the crime and criminals. We're not vetting this. It's pouring into our communities, and it's devastating. We need freedom, but we need rule of law alongside of it, or we lose the peace and tranquility we promise in the Constitution.
But we can have both,
order.
right? We can have both. We don't have to choose between security and a legal immigration system that works. We don't have to choose.
You're right.
They're compatible. In fact, they complement each other.
Yeah,
if
they
we have
do.
a legal immigration system that works, then there's going to be fewer people crossing, so Border Patrol's freed up to interdict people.
Do you think the president is doing everything he can to create order and law and at the border? And do you think he's doing everything within his power to make sure we have, seamlessness at the border with respect to immigration? Do you think he's doing everything he can?
I mean, all I can say is he's deported a lot of people, far more people. Even as a percentage of the people who arrived, he deported more in his first 2 years than the other administration did in its last 2 years.
Let me move on.
It's deported a lot of people. I don't think that's the answer. We got to get back to
I think
legal
it's,
immigration.
to me, it's
the
intellectually
problem.
dishonest to me to sidestep a very simple question. Is this president doing everything he can with the tools that he has, recognizing there are things that we need to do?
There are other values at stake.
I think
there are other values at stake. He could separate children like the last administration did. Yes, he could do that. He shouldn't do that. There are lines that you should
the
restrict.
deluge of crime coming across the border. Well, you know what, Mr. Blair, you were a Border Patrol officer. Is this just a natural ebb and flow, like my ranking member suggested, just a surge, a seasonal surge? Or is it, Let me-
Just to clarify, since quoting me, I didn't say seasonal surge. I mean, this is obviously beyond a season. I mean, we have a unique problem, 3 countries that have tremendous problems, the triangle countries in Central America, that are causing a large part of this. But what I did say is this started a couple decades ago. This has not just started the last couple of years.
Okay, let me take off then on that, and I don't want to mischaracterize you. Is this something that's been going on for, when I say this, and this is my last question, what we're experiencing now with the record flow of migrants, the record flow of drugs, record migrant deaths, record people on terrorist watches, is that something that's been going on, as the ranking member suggests, for a decade or so, or is this a recent phenomenon as a result of this administration's either policies, lack of leadership, et cetera, willful or not? Is this a longer tail, or is this something as a consequence of the current administration's policies?
Sure, to give you an example, let's look at the Venezuelan issue. So Venezuelans in 2017, we had roughly 2,600 encounters. And then fast forward to 2023, we had 334,000 encounters. Now you look at that, about 8 million people have fled Venezuela because of Hugo Chavez before, and then also Maduro, right? And so at first they were starting to go to South American countries, but it wasn't until the current administration's policies and procedures that allowed this to actually happen, and that invited all the foreign nationals from South America, regardless of what country of origin, to our southern border. So you can see the numbers or the data right there to show that this is not a natural occurrence. This is all by design, and it's all been done through policies through this administration.
I thank the gentleman, and now yield 5 minutes to my ranking member, Mr. Boyle.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to turn to the witness from the Cato Institute. I would point out Mr. Beer. Now, FAIR, F-A-I-R, the acronym, published a report on the alleged burden of migration to the U.S. Mr. Beer, you have over a decade of impressive experience in immigration studies. Your work has been cited widely, including by the U.S. Supreme Court. You've displayed your knowledge already here this morning. So with your background and knowledge and experience, I would like you to take this opportunity to comment on the FAIR report, their use of data in the report, and how the methodology of the report may fail to capture the broader context of immigration's economic benefit to the country.
Yeah, so the FAIR report significantly understates the tax benefits, expenditures, contributions of immigrants. I mean, you look at the state tax revenues that they calculate, it's 37% below what's in the census current population survey data, understates their federal income tax by about 88%, understates their Medicare and Social Security taxes by 62%. The discrepancies are so enormous, you're left with the impression that they're just inventing them, just like they invent the number of illegal immigrants in their study. They say they're 15.5 million. They just invented that number, and then so they can't use any of the available census data. FAIR counts the expenditures on education for US-born children, for example, minor children, excludes all of the tax payments from the adult children of immigrants in the United States. Doing that alone cuts the total number of tax payments in half, which they've already reduced by about 2/3. And they completely ignore tax incidents or taxes that are indirectly the result of immigrants. So they have zero tax incidents for corporate taxes that are paid by corporations who hire these workers. They have zero capital income taxes that they attribute to immigrants' work in the United States. Research has shown that those changes just by themselves can turn a low-skilled immigrant from dramatically negative to fiscally positive if they arrive early enough in their career.
Well, thank you. And building off of that, I would point out, something directly relevant to this committee, the Budget Committee. We had an important set of economic data or report released on Monday from the trustees of Social Security and Medicare trust funds. And we got tremendously good news because of this economy performing much better than was projected a year ago or a couple of years ago. the lifetime of the trust funds for Social Security and Medicare have been pushed out. That is good news that we all should cheer. I was wondering, given this is a hearing on immigration, what impact does immigration and immigrants have on Social Security and Medicare trust funds?
Well, the Social Security Trust Fund report directly says it. It's a result of increased labor force, and the increased labor force results in more tax revenue to Social Security. The report says that basically increasing from 829,000 to 1.7 million immigrants per year reduces the annual burden of Social Security by 1.5% of taxable payroll over by 2097, which is about $137 billion in today's terms. So very significant impact on Social Security revenues in the long term.
Yeah, and then finally, I wasn't planning on asking this, but since we had a good back and forth, and you had a good back and forth with the chairman, and I'm going off memory here, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but my memory of this becoming a really, I mean, of course, immigration's always been a hot button issue at different peaks in American history. It was the race riots, the anti-Catholic Know-Nothing riots of the 1840s happened in my district. They were so deadly, that's what led to the creation of the Philadelphia Police Department. Because of just how widespread and deadly they were. So this has been an ongoing story throughout American history. But I really remember in my lifetime the question on the southern border rising to a certain prominence right around 2005. That was when George W. Bush was working with John McCain and Senator Kennedy. You had a surge in crossings. Then you've had different drops, but increases. And then obviously we have an enormous challenge now. So if you could just walk me through kind of the last 20 years, my recollection of this correct? I mean, this has been a multi-decade issue that unfortunately does continue to get worse.
Look, the big difference between then and now is who's arriving. So Mexicans were arriving. You had about 2 million crossings in the border in the year 2000, but half of the people made it through. They made it across the border. This is according to estimates by the Department of Homeland Security. So the big difference now is more people turn themselves in. They're from countries that are very difficult to deport to, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, et cetera. Even the Northern Triangle countries are far more difficult to deport to than Mexico. So you had far more evasions in the early 2000s. Now you have more people seeking asylum. But the magnitude is nothing new to Border Patrol. We actually had more overwhelmed Border Patrol agents in the 2000s when you had the number of arrests exceeding 3 per day per Border Patrol agent, which is, totally unheard of today with 20,000 agents.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the ranking member. Now yield to Mr. McClintock from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need to begin by noting the Democrats' habit of discussing legal and illegal immigrants as if they were the same. That is a supreme insult to the millions of legal immigrants who enter our country every year by obeying our laws. Legal immigrants come here pledged to pull their weight, not to be a burden on others, to obey our laws, and to love and defend our country. Illegal immigrants come here under very different circumstances. Their first act is to commit a federal crime by illegally entering our country. Their second act is to demand free food, shelter, medical care, clothing, education, transportation, and legal services. I've watched them at the border taunting our Border Patrol as they illegally cross into our country. To equate their lawless behavior with law-abiding, hardworking, and patriotic legal immigrants is outrageous, and my colleagues who do so should be ashamed of themselves. The Senate bill that we heard the ranking member tout would make it impossible for a future president to use his existing authority to secure the border, as Trump did, until illegal crossings exceed 4,000 a day. And as Border Patrol agents tell us, the problem is not lack of laws, it's a deliberate decision by the Democrats not to enforce those laws. Now, the Democrats tell us, well, this is great for the economy. Since the more people in the economy, the larger it is. Well, duh. But as the CBO director testified to this committee earlier this year, the economic impact on working Americans is catastrophic because it suppresses wages for unskilled and low-skilled American workers. and it breeds an underground economy that further suppresses the competitiveness of American workers. So working Americans see their wages stagnate as a result, and many are forced out of the labor market entirely. Ms. Kirchner, how do we help working Americans by flooding the labor market with cheap, illegal labor?
We don't help them at all. And actually, if we wanted to be kind to their previous generations of immigrants, we would not flood the market with cheap labor. There is ample evidence that it depresses wages.
And the CBO director actually confirmed that right here before this committee. You estimated the net cost to U.S. taxpayers to be $150 billion to support these illegals after deducting what little tax they pay. That includes $70 billion in costs to our schools, does it not?
Yes, sir.
And $22 billion for medical care?
Yes, sir.
What do you think the Democrats would say if Republicans proposed cutting $70 billion out of our schools and $22 billion out of our hospitals? And yet, isn't that exactly what they're doing?
Well, I wouldn't propose to put words in anyone's mouth, but I do think that illegal immigration has consequences, and we need to accept that as a nation, and we need to make good policy decisions, and that means understanding the real impact of what's going on and the costs that are associated, not just the economic benefits, as you said, of growing the greater economic pie, the GDP measuring alone, and
by the way,
everything is made up of choices, and if you look...
And your estimate of cost is just direct cost of the government. It's not the cost of crimes committed by illegals.
Exactly.
It's not the cost of wage reductions for working Americans.
Exactly.
It's strictly
It's a
the direct
snapshot
cost.
of payments and revenues.
The Democrats tell us that illegal immigrants are more law-abiding than Americans. Mr. Smith, are the illegals entering your county more law-abiding than your legal residents?
Well, I can tell you from the numbers that I quoted earlier, of those thousands of cases, we have about 50 county residents being prosecuted. The remaining is the result of an open border. And I would just add that, there is a difference.
I've got to go on. Ms. Kirchner, did you not look at the SCAPE requests made by states for the cost of incarcerating illegals and conclude that illegals are 231% more likely to be jailed for crimes in California, 440% more likely in New Jersey, and 60% more likely in Texas?
I have not looked at the recent data, but I know, and certainly in California, it's very high.
In fact, in some states like California, they make it illegal to report immigration status of suspects. So using Cato's methodology, illegal aliens never commit a crime in California.
Yes. That is a problem, sir, and we do know the truth. We know, and even, what's interesting is even the Biden administration recently has been coming out and saying, please, sanctuary cities, please honor our detainers. We don't want to deport many people, but the people we want to deport are very bad.
Let me just finish by saying that the opposition to illegal immigration is not opposition to legal immigration. In fact, the people I find who are the angriest about illegal immigration are the legal immigrants who have played by the rules, waited patiently in line, and are now watching millions of illegal migrants cut in line in front of them. And if we're going to encourage and reward illegal immigration, which is the clear and consistent policy of the Democrats today, then there's no point in legal immigration. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired, and we now yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate in this committee that there's actually some back and forth, even at the start. And I want to say, as a first-generation American myself, that I am very anxious to see and to talk most directly about the positive aspect of immigration to this country. We've heard about how all the projections of the it was at $7 trillion to our economy from immigrants, and another trillion, that we're going to benefit, or billions that we're going to, $1 trillion over a decade. And money going into our own budget. But here's the thing that I'm really struggling with. In Chicago, we had a roundtable from employers and then immigrants who want to work. Employers are desperate for workers right now. We want to increase those numbers. And yet, when you talk to the immigrants and the migrants, and I have too many, I say, what is it that you want from the United States? The number one answer is a job. I want to work. The fact that we could boost our economy if we had a better immigration process, a system, we could do this as a Congress of the United States to make a much more sensible one. And I have to say to you, Mr. Blair, you're talking about what goes on in Texas. I have to tell you, there are busloads of people being put into cars and into trucks to come to my city. These are people who are desperate. They have come across this border and made it because they want a better life. And you know what happens to them? They don't even know where they're being sent to. And they are dropped off in places they have never heard of. We lost a child on one of those trips. Often no water given to them on the way from Texas to Chicago. Who are we as a country right now? When these are people who are coming here with every intention to make this country better, to have a safer place. These are human beings and are not really treated that way by the governor that you are touting right now for all the great work and the trauma. And, you know, when we talk about the chaos, I think there are people, including Donald Trump, who want the chaos to continue. And what he has said, and I quote, that what immigrants do is poison the blood of our country. How awful. I'm sorry. I do want to talk to you, Mr. Baer, and if whatever time is remaining, and we seem to be flexible in time around here, to respond to the positive of what immigrants can do, and if we don't have them, and I want to ask you, what if we had a mass deportation, or if we were to stop immigration in the United States, which some recommend, especially so-called illegal, undocumented people, what would happen to our economy?
Well, it would be a massive contraction in our economy. We would lose, over the next decade, about 1% of our GDP would go away from just mass deportation of the long-time illegal immigrant residents, not even talking about the ones who've come recently who are applying for asylum. So massive contraction in the economy, huge blow to employers, a huge exodus of foreign direct investment into our economy, because people aren't going to invest in an economy that has a shrinking workforce. If you don't have workers here, you're not going to be able to build factories here. You're not going to be able to have farms here. And so you're going to see investment go offshore. You're going to see jobs go offshore.
Let me just ask this, did employment help prevent the economy going down in the United States?
Yes, absolutely. Without the immigrants that we've had, we would have had a decline in our labor force since December of 2020, December of 2019. So immigrants are the reason why gross domestic product and the number of jobs has been increasing so significantly. And the CBO report goes into great detail on that.
The gentlelady's time has expired, and we'll now give 5 minutes to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Glenn Grothman.
Thank you much. First of all, I'd like to make a unanimous consent request to submit the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services final rule for CMS released today. that will lead to 100,000 new enrollees under the Affordable Care Act at a cost of $7 billion.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Breyer, at the end there, you heard the testimony earlier today, the number of freebies that are being given away, particularly in the parole program from Haiti and Mexico. People immediately eligible, I take it, for low-income housing, food stamps, medical care. Does this concern you when we are giving away these amount, earned income tax credit, which I consider a horrible program with all sorts of perverse incentives?
It's totally unnecessary. We could not spend that money, rebate it to taxpayers. There's no reason why we need to do this. If we don't want to spend the money, don't spend the money. And I know you have a bill that would do just that, but it's a choice. It's a choice. And so far, all of the immigration bills that have come out of the House of Representatives, none of them have dealt with this issue. So it is an issue, but it's not one that changes the immigration from
You're
good
right.
to bad.
This is the best bill. You should talk to Speaker Johnson on that anywhere out the building. But in a hearing I was at a little while ago, someone testified that the number of people in prisons in Venezuela has dropped 20% over, I don't know, the last year or so. And apparently the president of Venezuela himself has kind of bragged a little bit that he's sending the criminal element here. Is that a possible concern when you have anybody who wants coming across the border instead of picking your immigrants?
Well, it's certainly a concern. That's why we have Border Patrol to interdict those people and, of course, screen them. And, you know, if they're a criminal threat, they should be removed. I don't trust anything the Maduro government says, so whatever information you're getting from them, I would question that.
Well,
but you should really take information from a credible source, not from a socialist government.
I'll point out, you understand that when these people come across the southern border, we can try to check and see if they have a criminal record in the U.S. and Canada. There's no way to find out whether they have a criminal record, even from Mexico, much less from Venezuela or...
Well, almost none of the people come directly from Venezuela. They spend time in these other countries where we do have information sharing agreements. They're getting their fingerprints checked in Panama and all along the way. So it is a concern. We should obviously have strict security and make sure that we're vetting people. But the idea that this turns it from, oh, we have to keep out every Venezuelan from the United States is not true. Venezuelans have a much lower incarceration rate in the United States than U.S.-born persons do, according to the American Community Survey. So the idea that we need to just ban an entire nationality because there's some uncertainties here is just not a reasonable conclusion.
I'm going to ask Ms. Kirchner to give us some information on stuff that people who come here, either parole or what we'll refer to as illegally, are immediately eligible for, and what you think that does to the cross-section of people who are currently coming here.
Well, sir, those who come here legal, it depends how they're released. And this is one of the ways the Biden administration has significantly exacerbated the problem. So if you are released through parole, parole is given a status under our benefits programs much like that of a legal permanent resident. And we know that there are millions of parolees. We don't know the exact amount. I'm waiting for the latest report to come out. But we know that there are millions of parolees. And because they are considered lawfully present, even though they have no legal status, they are immediately eligible for work permits. They're eligible for Social Security numbers. They're eligible for Obamacare. And that also, the Social Security number opens up the box to tax benefits, earned income tax credit, and the additional child tax credit. But where we're really going to see the cost, these parolees, because they're treated like legal permanent residents, some of them immediately get benefits. The Cubans and Haitians, as I said, are immediately eligible for everything. But the chickens will come home to roost in about 5 years when all of these other parolees who are not Cubans and Haitians are going to be eligible for everything. And so we need to be aware that without adding one illegal alien crossing the border, the costs are going to go up.
Okay, thank you. I just want to get in a last word on something. I've been down to the border several times, and whenever I'm down there, the Border Patrol points out that unless you have a criminal record from the US or Canada, there is no way for them to determine whether or not you have a record. That is what they are telling me, and
I mean, you should look at some of the CBP press releases that they put out when they catch people from Colombia or other countries.
The gentleman's time is expired. I don't need help. But I know there's a lot of folks that like to give me help. Jimmy, why don't you help me out? Take 5 minutes.
I'll try, Mr.
Take 5 minutes, and I may give you a little extra too, if it's a interesting and intellectually honest conversation.
I can't promise you that, but thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate this opportunity. And ranking member and gentlemen and ma'am, thank you very much for being here. I think we can all agree upon a couple of things. That obviously, when it comes to immigration, it's a very emotional issue. I think it's emotional because we're all connected to it in one way or the other, especially in this country. Yes, as I agree with the ranking member, we are a nation of immigrants, but I'll go one step further. We're a nation of risk takers, people who are willing to take the risk to come here to provide a better life, either for themselves or for their children. And ultimately, I firmly believe, as the grandson of immigrants, that is the American dream. That is why people still want to come here. Not to rape, not to pillage, but they want to provide a better life for them and their families. And I think we're so damn lucky to have that, to be a country like that where people still want to come here. And I think that's part of the emotions behind this. But look, I think we can all agree in this room and outside of this room, there's a crisis at the border. We get it, got it, check. We understand that. A humanitarian, a familial, a criminal, and a financial crisis that we are facing at this point. But rather than just continue to talk about the issues, we want to make sure we talk about solutions. Unfortunately, especially here in the United States Congress, especially in this political world, when we talk about solutions, it is difficult. It's difficult because what I've seen in my limited time that I've been here in Congress, immigration reform, border security is the most politically toxic, policy complicated issue I've worked on, unfortunately. Unfortunately. In the 7.5 years that I've been here, we've tried, though. We've tried, and we've actually had some successes. I think we've agreed, Jody, Mr. Chairman, in the time that we've been here, I think we've voted on $120 million in border security. That went to infrastructure, technology, and personnel. We also got some places when it came to immigration reform. Not necessarily comprehensive immigration reform. We realized that was difficult, but we kind of backed off and we looked at it piecemeal. We did the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, one of my proudest things that I personally worked on, yet just as fulfilling, it was frustrating because it was the most bipartisan immigration bill passed out of the House of Representatives in the last 2 decades. Unfortunately, it got stalled in the Senate. I'm going to get back to you, Mr. Beer, on that in a second. We had the DREAM and the Promise Act as well. And then, of course, we had potentially what happened in the last few months, that Senate deal, and I got to give a lot of credit to one of my conservative colleagues in the Senate, James Lankford, and one of my most liberal colleagues in the Senate, Murphy from Connecticut. A very conservative deal that would have provided funding, would have provided infrastructure, would have provided personnel, would have raised the standards of asylum, an issue that we're dealing with at the border that is causing the most consternation there and difficulties there. But unfortunately, it was rejected by the leader of the Republican Party, Donald Trump, and therefore no other Republican would go with it. So it's obviously difficult. But I think when you have people who have the political will to come up with solutions, we can actually do this, not just rag on each other when it comes to the issues. We got it. We get it. But we got to make sure that we talk about solutions. I believe one of the solutions with the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, I say that because of the district that I represent on the Central Coast of California. I've seen, not just familially, I've seen in my neighborhood, in my community, immigrants who have come here who want to contribute. And we know what it's like out there picking strawberries. We know what it's like in slaughterhouses. We know what it's like now in construction yards. You do not see too many native-born Americans doing that type of work. And so, Mr. Beer, I want to address my question to you as to what type of effect, when you look at our agriculture, who's doing those jobs these days?
Look, it's right now, most of the increase in our agricultural workforce is coming through the H-2A guest worker visa program. So these are temporary seasonal workers. Unfortunately, those jobs, that visa category is not available for any job that's year-round. So if you have a farm and you're planting year-round and that job, that worker that you need is year-round, that visa is unavailable. That's one of the things the Farm Workforce Modernization Act would have relaxed that rule and allowed people to work in year-round agriculture. So that's where a lot of the illegal immigration and illegal employment ultimately is going, because there's no legal way for people to hire through that program. So if you get rid of the workers, I mean, you're talking about half of the agricultural labor force is just immigrants, forgetting about their children.
You know as well as I do, that's a generous number.
Yeah. Well, all these estimates are ballparks.
Exactly. And I would go so far as say is that you have a number of people working in agriculture, and I think the estimates that I've seen, 70% working in ag on those farms, unfortunately, do not have proper status. Yet they are continuing to contribute to our agricultural economy, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have the manpower to do specialty crops in this country, you're going to import all those high-profit crops from abroad, and that's the nature of a free market economy. That's the nature of global competition. Our farmers want to compete internationally and be exporting food around the world and compete in those high-margin crops.
I want to thank you. I want to thank the witnesses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look forward to working on not just highlighting the issues. Let's make sure we have the political will to come up with
Well, I
solutions.
appreciate the gentleman from California's sincere efforts and his leadership to fix some of the broken parts of the of the immigration, rather, system in our country around agriculture. He is, in fact, a leader on that, and I appreciate it. Now, I yield 5 minutes or so to my friend from the Keystone State, Mr. Lloyd Smucker.
Mr. Beard, do you think we should get operational control of the border? We should have operational control.
Absolutely.
Do you think we should stop the flow of illegal immigration?
Yes.
Do you think we should welcome productive individuals who want to be productive members of our society to come here?
Yes.
And they should be properly vetted?
Yes.
So you think we should increase our legal immigration?
Yes.
Ms. Kirkner, do you think we should get operational control of the border?
Yes, sir.
We should stop the flow of illegal immigrants?
Yes.
Do you think that we should properly vet legal immigrants and we should continue to do so?
Absolutely.
Do you think that we need individuals who want to come here, who want to be productive members of society?
Absolutely. We should have skilled immigration. Yes, sir.
So we really aren't far apart. And I don't think Democrats and Republicans are all that far apart here either. I do think, Ms. Kirkner, one of the pieces that you miss, and not to argue with you, but that you miss slightly is we do need workers, and workers who come here and perform jobs that are needed contribute to our economy. They'll buy food, they'll buy clothing. They will, in general, benefit the United States by growing our economy, by stronger growth in the economy that benefits by those workers paying into the Social Security system, paying into Medicare, generating additional revenue and additional taxes. It's unfortunate today that that is happening with illegal immigrants. It should not be happening because at the same time, we then are allowing the flow of drugs. We're allowing the flow of criminals into the country. And that is, I'm from Lancaster County, 2,000 miles from the border. We have hundreds of fentanyl deaths in our region. It's a real problem that we have. Every single city, every single area of the country really has been affected by the Biden administration's policy on the border. So I agree with almost everything that you're saying, Mr. Beer. I agree with almost everything that you're saying as well. We've got to fix it. And the Biden administration has absolutely failed the American people with what they're allowing to happen on the border. But I think it's really, really important that we not continue to conflate the two issues. We need legal immigrants. We need individuals to take jobs. And I think it's actually the opposite of what you said, Ms. Kirkner. I don't think they're taking American jobs. I think what happens if we don't have an adequate workforce, companies that can choose to do so will go to other countries, will go to other areas to build their new factory. So I think immigrant workers are actually a net gain for American workers as well. And I just, one small thing where you and I disagree. Mr. Beer, I think you're passionate in what you're saying. I think you could be more convincing if you're more open to an understanding of other viewpoints and not as confrontational. I think it's really important that we have these real conversations, we address the real concerns that the American people have about the border, and recognizing the absolute abject failure of the Biden administration's border policy is absolutely important, particularly for those of us, the witnesses here from Texas. You're seeing it probably more than other communities, but we're seeing it in my community as well. And so I agree completely with Representative Panetta. We have to fix this. We can do it. This panel isn't far apart. The members of Congress aren't far apart on this issue. I have a bill that would actually create an entirely new visa program for those year-round workers, for farm workers, but then also construction, healthcare. There are a lot of people, there are a lot of places where we need millions of workers. This also then gets muddied. We also need to increase the workforce participation rate of Americans. That's another way we resolve our worker issue. But we can't do it without immigrants. And in fact, I don't think we can solve our debt problem unless we're really growing this economy. And I think immigration, legal immigration, where we're properly vetting immigrants, as we always have done, is a really important part of that. So sorry I didn't get to any more questions, but thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll yield back.
I appreciate your line of thinking and comments and associate myself with them. And now we're going to continue on the Republican side with Mr. Bob Good from Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate all of our witnesses who are here today. I have a question. I would like to try to get 4 succinct answers as I go down the row, starting with Mr. Kirshner. What percentage, in your opinion, estimation, your research, what percentage or what number of the world's non-U.S. population would come to America if they could? So in other words, we got roughly 350 million Americans, some 7 billion plus people who don't live in the United States. So if they could, what percentage of the world's population or what number would you just kind of a guesstimate based on would come here if they could?
Yes, sir. Fortunately, I didn't know it would be a pop quiz, but I know Gallup.
You know there'd be math in this.
No. I didn't. I do know Gallup has done some surveys, and I know I think it's probably a third.
So you're saying somewhere in the 2 billion range. I'm just assigning a number to a third, maybe 2 to 3 billion, something like that.
You know, that would be my guess. You couldn't hold me to it.
Okay, Mr. Blair, if you had to guesstimate a number, if they could, the world's population that would come to the United States if they could.
Well, the U.S. is the greatest country in the world, so I would probably put it maybe 50% or more.
Okay, you're saying 3-4 billion. Mr. Smith?
I'd make it a close 70%.
Close to 70%. So you're saying in the 5 billion type range, and then down at the end, Mr. Beer.
Well, it would certainly be over 100 billion, but we can focus on the people who
Over
have already
100
gotten the
billion.
process.
We don't have 100 billion. You meant 100
Sorry,
million.
100 million.
You're saying
Wow.
only 100 million. You think
We could, yeah.
you're saying only 100 million.
Well, that's about what Gallup
Only 100 million.
estimates. Yeah.
What's the population of Africa? What's the population of South America? What's the population of Asia? And you think only
Yeah, I
100
mean,
million of them. There's what, 5 billion between those, just roughly making it up? So you're saying in the range of 2% would come here? 2% would come here if they could?
I mean, wages equalize over time. So look at what we have
Okay,
open borders
thank
with
you.
Puerto
Thank you.
Rico.
I think you know where I'm going. Thank you. I reclaim my time. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So how many should we let come to America? I think that's a fundamental question. How many should we let come to America? Meaning legal, illegal, some want to mix the two together, which is offensive. I wish Mr. Glencott was still here. How many should we let come?
Yes, sir.
What would be a good number?
We believe that current immigration rates are about as much as we can sustain as a nation. We would, however, advocate that those immigrants be skilled. We think for the national interest, it would benefit. both our
Respectfully, I'm going to
economy-
apologize because I've only got 2 minutes and I'm
Yes, sir.
going somewhere. I apologize, Mr. Kirshner, for that.
fine.
I think the question, okay, what percentage would come if they could? How many should we let come? And what number would make us no longer America? And is it worth preserving what makes us distinctly, uniquely America? Is that worth preserving? The fundamental question relative to the illegal alien invasion, or for those who support the illegal alien invasion, first of all, as others have said, there's no such thing as illegal immigration. Immigration is a legal, lawful process. For that matter, legal immigrants are Americans, aren't they? Legal immigrants are Americans, of course. They wanted to be Americans. They earned their citizenship. They pledged their allegiance. They learned our language. At least everyone that I have interacted with at the naturalization ceremonies they have the privilege of going to has learned our language. They've had the means and the ability to contribute to our economy and our society to make us stronger, make us better. In fact, this Friday, 2 days from now, I look forward to welcoming another group among the million or so that we legally allow into this country every year, legally. I'm going to welcome them at Patrick Henry's Red Hill home in my district. I have the most historic district in the country, I would submit. So the fundamental question for those who support the illegal alien invasion is, does everyone around the world have the right to come to America? Or does America have the right to decide who gets to come to America? How about that? Those two questions. Does everyone around the world have the right to come to America, or does America get to decide who has the right to be in America? Ms. Kirchner.
Americans should be able to decide the future of their country.
Blair.
Thank you, sir.
Americans should decide.
Mr. Smith.
Same.
Mr. Beer.
America should decide, but there should be a
Yes,
presumption
thank
in
you very
favor of
much.
liberty.
And that's the question that it does indeed make us very far apart from what Lloyd said. Because what many on the other side believe, and I would submit Mr. Beer believes this if he was being honest with us, that they believe that, because of the statements that he said in his opening remarks, they believe they have the right to be here. And then the ranking member talked about the triangle countries coming here. You know, we cannot, and he said the problem is we got to go fix those triangle countries, so they don't want to come here anymore from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The only way we can do that is to let lawlessness reign, destroy our economy, defund and undermine our police, destroy our institutions, so that we become as bad as some of these countries around the world. And then the journey and the cost of the journey, the difficulty is no longer worth it. I submit that's Democrat policies carried through. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I submit. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for.
I'm sorry, for the record, sir, if I may.
sir.
I ask unanimous consent to submit an article of support from the Center Square regarding the 60 counties in Texas that have declared an emergency and the 50 counties that have declared an invasion in light of the crisis at our southwest border.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. I yield back.
I now yield 5 minutes to General Jack Bergman from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an April 2024 article from Gallup titled Immigration Named Top U.S. Problem for Third Straight Month.
Without objection, so ordered.
As Gallup findings confirm, Americans continue to be deeply troubled by President Biden's refusal to secure the southern border or enforce immigration law. This should not come as a surprise to anyone in this room. We got issues, especially you, Mr. Blair. You got a lot of years in an Army uniform. I got a few years in a Marine uniform, so I'm going to kind of talk to you, especially with your last, 10-plus years here with the Border Patrol. We can talk soldier to Marine. But I also serve on armed services, so I'm a little bit familiar, and in a former life wearing the hat of Commander Marine Forces North, which we dealt with the border, if you will. Some of my information may be a little dated, but not much. Okay. Mr. Blair, in your written testimony submitted to the committee, you note that the level of illegal mass immigration U.S. is currently, the level is currently seeing is a deliberate, this is quote, a deliberate and calculated strategy of weaponizing migration to undermine the sovereignty and security of the United States and its states. Could you elaborate just a little bit? Don't take a whole lot, but just give me a couple of, elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, sir. If you look at the great work done by Kelly Greenhill and also Joseph Humeyer from the Heritage Foundation, they've done a lot of case studies in regards to this. Weaponized mass migration has happened over 80 times since the 1951 Refugee Convention. It's when a state or a non-state actor uses human beings as a weapon to eradicate someone's sovereignty. So in my report, I stated Lukashenko was doing that against the countries of Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, where he forced foreign nationals to other people's borders in order to decrease the security of the environment so that they could decrease the sovereignty of that nation. By following that same playbook, the current administration is inviting massive amounts of foreign nationals to our southern border in order to decrease or eradicate our sovereignty, force Border Patrol agents, like what I was doing, and other law enforcement agencies and also local law enforcement to address that that mass migration, which decreases the security of the environment and allows the Mexican cartels to completely operationally control both sides. And so that's really what weaponized mass migration is. It's a tool to completely eradicate sovereignty.
So I'm going to put my words on this. They're organized on many different levels. So having said that, since we know we have, as the United States of America, we have foreign adversaries, Russia, China, Iran. Do you think they're looking at the cost of illegal immigration that it imposes on our taxpayers, and that this is part of the calculations of the Iranians, the Chinese, the Russians? Again, if it's organized, somebody's doing the math on how much money we're pouring into this. Do you think that is a calculation that they use?
Yes, sir, 100%. The Chinese use the unrestricted warfare, so it's every asymmetric means to eradicate our sovereignty and security, and financial warfare is one of those means.
Okay, and how plausible is it that foreign nationals are illegally coming to the U.S. at the direction of adversarial governments to engage in espionage or to potentially be in sleeper cells?
It happens every single day. Look what's happened the first few days in May. We had more Chinese illegal aliens coming through the Southern California than we did all of FY21. And so when you look at that issue and you see that our vetting process, we're not, as Border Patrol agents, we typically don't vet. And you look at these military-age males, and you look at the difference between those that are actually running from, whether that's communism or running from situations where their life is in danger, compared to the ones that we're actually apprehending. You can see in direct confidence that they're here for nefarious means.
Okay, and I see my time is about to run out, but would you think that potentially the cartels are operating as brokers and playing all sides against the middle to create the environment that, because of their use of drones, because of their use of different submersibles, because of all the things they use, that there are probably things that we don't see that are tied together for the benefit of those against us?
Yes, sir. The Mexican cartels have completely controlled the operational border. The southern border, and have created a Silk Road for the CCP to enter every single one of our communities.
Well, in Marine terms, I'm guessing probably the Army says the same thing. We got snipers in the wire.
Yes, sir.
On the inside, and the weapons are pointed at us, and we need to not continue to turn a blind eye to that fact. And I'll just say, I'll yield back. I guess I'm a little bit over, but I would suggest that as a personal trait for anyone, arrogance creates a blind spot in all of us. So we, in our dealings with ourselves and others, should look to eliminate those blind spots. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Michigan, and yield now 5 minutes to the gentlelady from Michigan, Lisa McClain.
I see a trend going here, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I think it's interesting that you have all the Republicans asking questions right now, so I appreciate this hearing, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, we care, and I know you do. I know we've talked about the numbers, but I think it bears repeating. The federal government spent over $66 billion on illegal immigrants in 2023. according to the Federation for American Immigration. Does anyone here want to guess how much we've spent on homeless veterans in '23? Guess? High, well, let's just start. Higher, lower, the same? Anybody want to guess?
Fractional.
Fractional. Thank you. 3 billion. 66 on illegals, 3 billion on people who have laid down their lives for this country. Can anyone explain up there why that makes sense?
Well, one is including all sorts of benefits, and one is just looking at a very, very narrow slice.
No, I'm using the same
So if you
numbers.
look
I'm,
at-
sir,
if
you are,
did a
I am
correct
using
comparison,
apples
it would
to
be a very
apples.
different
I'm using apples to
calculation.
apples. So since you know, why don't you share with me?
We don't
Oh,
track
you
U.S.
don't
vet-
know.
we don't check
You don't
track
know.
U.S.
Okay.
veterans in the census, so that would be very helpful if we did. Then I would be
Yeah,
able to
we
give
did,
you a
but
very
do you know
good-
the answer? Because
good-
I do. I do. So I appreciate your opinion of which you have no facts on, but let me continue and let me educate you some more. The federal government, breaking that $66 billion down, let's look at what we fund. So you might want to get a pencil and paper and take some notes because I'll help you do your job. $5.8 billion in SNAP, $10 billion in Medicare, $8.2 billion in uncompensated hospital expenditures, $3 billion for primary and secondary education for illegal immigrants, And how many illegal immigrants are given taxpayer-funded housing compared to the number of homeless veterans that are sleeping on the street? You don't know because you don't want to know. You don't want to see the numbers. Well, different. I do, and I can share with you the American people do. Because I'll share with you, the people in my district, in Michigan, of the 9th District, we care about our homeless veterans. We care about our veterans. And yes, we care about them a little bit more than we care about people who have broken the law to get here illegally. So I actually have some suggestions, and maybe some answers on how to fix it. Instead of $66 billion, here are a couple things we could spend. The White House has requested $13 million for the National Call Center for homeless veterans. I'm going to say it again, $13 million with an M, right? Maybe we could find that out of that $66 billion, right, different between million and billion, big difference, we could funnel some more of that $66 billion to our homeless veterans. Anyone opposed to that? Why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we doing it? Anybody got an idea? Anybody got an idea? Why we're not, God bless you, why we're not doing it? I'll tell you why we're not doing it, because the Biden administration does not want to do it. Am I correct? Am I incorrect on that? I didn't think so. This year's budget request from the White House asks for $17.2 billion in mental health spending for veterans. That $10 billion we lose to Medicare spending would surely benefit to struggle with the mental health issues. So why don't we do this? America's a very charitable country. Why don't we take care of our own first? Anyone see a problem with that? Why don't we? I'll tell you why we don't. Because the Biden administration doesn't want to do that. It's maddening to me. The White House budget requested for caregiver support programs not $2.9 billion. Maybe instead of $3 billion for educating illegal immigrants, we can give more funding to caregiver support programs, right? We're all talking about both sides of the aisle, which ironically doesn't even want to participate in this hearing, sadly, but not unexpected. We all talk about caregiving as a problem, right? I hear that on both sides of the aisle. What would happen if we took that $3 billion and gave it to caregivers that live in the United States? Anyone have a problem with that? Why don't we do it? Anybody? The Biden administration doesn't want to do it. And you play games with your facts. And you play this shell game. Well, I'm going to share with you, the American people are not fooled, and they are frustrated and fed up with it. Let's just be honest about where this money is going so we possibly can redirect it to the correct place. Let's start with our veterans. Thank you, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady from Michigan and now yield 5 minutes to my friend from Utah, Mr. Blake Moore.
Thank you, Chairman. This is I've had last 2.5, 3 years, numerous town halls. This is the topic that has been at every single one. I'm from Utah. We're not on the southern border. We are recognized recently again as the top state in the nation from U.S. News. We have all the right economic indicators, all this great stuff going on, and the massive concern of what's going on at the border and what could potentially be the problem with what has happened over the last 3 years in 10 years from now. Well, what implications that this has on the next decade? So immediate acute issues and what ultimately plays out is terrifying to my constituents. To me, as I see some of the simple things that you saw from the previous administration, heard Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, talk about the negotiations with Mexico to come up with the Remain in Mexico plan. I wish we could create a legislative fix to it. I would be all for it. Make it permanent, make it into law, figure out the catch and release issues, parole authority, all across the board. President Biden came to office and he just said, you know what, I don't like President Trump, what President Trump and Mike Pence did. I'm gonna just take it away. There was positive things happening and we're gonna reverse it all. That's what he did. Everybody knows it. Every single constituent of mine understands that there was frustration there. And I wish we could fix it legislatively too. I think there's a solid group of Republicans and Democrats that recognize we have to have strong border security and we have to fix our immigration antiquated process. We get it. But for 30 years, we haven't been able to fix it. President Biden can at least do something right now, and he's been unwilling to do it. Mr. Blair, Ammon, a couple questions. And so I've got numbers here. Cartels have seen, according to Homeland Security investigations, cartels have seen their human trafficking and smuggling profits soar from $500 million in 2019 to well over $13 billion in 2022. Now, it's going to be hard for us to accurately track the amount of money that the cartels are making. I don't think they properly report on their W-2s what they're profiting from this. But would you say that's directionally correct from your understanding?
That is directionally correct.
We're not talking a small difference from that's one factor that's different from 2019. I'll give it two. There's two factors that's different from 2019 to 2022. One of them was there was a pandemic that caused some disruption. And the other one was that President Biden came in and his administration reversed every single border provision that was going on, and he has allowed for 3.5 years of this to continue on. This is enabling cartels, enemies of our country, bringing in fentanyl and running the show down on the southern border. There's an intersection here with Department of Homeland Security and the intelligence community. Do you think there are effective ways for DHS agents to work with the intelligence community on tracking cartel whereabouts in border towns, intercepting plans, and disrupting operations? Can you just speak to that and maybe the current state between DHS and the intelligence community and what we need to be doing better?
Yeah, first and foremost, they need to be designated as foreign terrorist organizations in order to get the intelligence apparatus to completely understand what Mexican cartels are actually doing. Also, you also need to change the Uniform Crime Report or the National Incident-Based Reporting System. As it stands right now, a lot of cartel-related activity is actually not put into that system. So we're actually running blind right now. So whether that's going to be Border Patrol on the ground, HSI, anyone in the Department of Justice, all of us are operating in silos. There's not a lot of shared information. There is some. And I do give credit to those that are sharing, whether that's at the individual tactical level and maybe sometimes at the operational level. But in terms of trying to understand the entire threat, as it stands now with our current system, that's almost impossible.
I shudder whenever I hear the concept of not sharing intelligence and properly communicating with each other. We saw from the 9/11 Commission that we can do better in the IC. So I encourage you, and I want to be a voice back here to make sure I can do whatever we can to get out ahead of that issue and realize that we're on the same team and working together. Existing funding. Let's talk at least existing funding and where we need to put most of that in order to divert migrants to only the ports of entry, help end the reign of the cartels and secure the sovereignty. anything on the additional funding or existing funding that we can be doing a better job of that right now?
Yes, sir. Critical infrastructure between the ports of entry. So adhering to the Secure Fence Act of 2006, that would deny almost all illegal entries, which would stop one of the commodities. And I hate to reference foreign nationals or human beings as commodities, but to the Mexican cartels, that's what they are.
That's what they are to them.
And so in order to deny that, we would need some sort of apparatus between the ports of entry in order to actually understand the domain awareness of it and also be able to stop it. Because as it stands now, as a Border Patrol agent, you're going down there, a lot of times it's like it's back in 1924. I'm having to cut sign on roads to understand what is actually who, where, when, why, or how is actually coming across, because we don't even have the technology to understand that.
I was only able to ask questions to you, Mr. Budd, but thank you to all of our witnesses for their tireless work on this. We've got to come up with solutions and fix this issue. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman from Utah, and now yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from Vermont, Ms. Ballin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. When we have people come and share their time with us, it helps us to do our jobs better, so I appreciate it. Mr. Byer, I said to you earlier, I was very pleased to meet you this morning because I have been following your writing for some time, and there are so many things that you've written that absolutely resonate and make sense for me, given our situation in Vermont with our workforce crisis. And so you said, America has never needed immigration like it does now. I would agree based on what I see in across industries in Vermont. You've also said that without immigration, the US population will decline. By the 2030s, we have labor force decline. The jobs that are going unfilled are not gonna be filled without immigrants. Just numbers don't work out, doesn't pencil out, right? So as the US prime age employment rate is at near record high, and we still have thousands and thousands of jobs that are going left unfilled, even in my small state of Vermont. So, and the other piece that we talk about a lot in here is Social Security and making sure we shore up Social Security. So immigrants, we know, will work and they will pay into the system, and that can boost Social Security revenues, which we desperately need. And so thank you so much for being here today. The data seems to indicate that the nation's public debt is set to increase to $54 trillion by 2034. And I'm wondering, how can immigration help to offset this debt that we see coming?
Look, we need, obviously, reform to our spending program. So, I don't want to say that immigration is going to somehow solve all of our problems.
Absolutely, multi-pronged.
At the margin, immigration helps. And, we have the Congressional Budget Office saying that we're going to reduce spending or reduce the deficit by $1 trillion over the next decade just from that. And if you look at long-term, the Social Security Trustees Report finds massive gains from immigration. When you talk about Social Security, you can measure that in workers. They tell us how many workers we need in order to fund retirees.
Right.
And by the mid-2030s, they're going to be about 35 million workers short of what they need to keep Social Security revenues at equal to expenses. So there is a huge need in the United States, and it's measured in tens of millions, not thousands.
Thank you. In my home state, as I mentioned, we have a terrible workforce crisis right now, and it is particularly hard on one of our core industries, the dairy industry. 2/3 of New England's milk production is supported by migrant workers, immigrants who come to work, and it's not just the ag industry. In Vermont, specifically the milk industry, it's ag industry across the country, right? We know this. Can you tell us what affects strict immigration policies? And I'm talking about legal immigration, like the number of people coming in, the number of people able to work. How does that impact all of us, not just in terms of workforce, but on our pocketbooks in terms of the prices that we're paying? Like, how does it fit into the general contours of the economy?
Right, so we're in a global economy. We can import milk from abroad. We have to compete with farmers around the world who can manufacture this stuff cheaper because they have lower costs of labor in those countries. Of course, we're more productive in this country, and our farms are more efficient in that respect, but they still need the workers, they still need the labor. And if you look at what we're doing with the H-2A visa program, we exclude all year-round agriculture from that program. So there's 0 visas under that program for year-round dairies, where you have a need, the cows have to be milked
Yes.
all year round.
Yes.
And there's no recognition of that need in federal law right now.
And I believe we get so caught up in divisive rhetoric that we just don't look at things, the common sense initiatives that we could take around immigration and allowing also migrant workers to work legally. There are things there are levers available to us that we're not using. The other thing I'm very concerned about in my home state, and I know it's not just Vermont, it's most of New England, we have an aging population. We literally do not have the workers to fill the current jobs, let alone growth that industry wants to have in Vermont. And I just don't see how we're gonna get there without.
Yeah, without immigration, we're gonna have a prime age workforce decline of 6 million over the next decade. That's enormous. So, you're talking about essentially, that's 2% of the population. So that's a significant decline in a very short period, and at a point where we desperately need more people to counteract the effects of aging. You mentioned about a quarter of our population is going to be over the age of 65 by 2050.
Yeah.
We have to have immigration to deal with that problem, that issue.
I really appreciate it, and just to acknowledge you have worked for a more conservative think tank. I am a progressive from Vermont, but on these issues, there is a common sense coming together that we have to focus on that and not the divisive rhetoric. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank
I
you.
thank the gentlelady from Vermont, and now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Yocum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, as well as to our witnesses for being here today. This chart behind me paints a picture of the Biden administration's failure to secure the southern border, which by far outpaces any of his predecessors. This is a chart that shows every single president, first term to the first 38 months for the last 6 presidential terms in cumulative illegal border crossings. President Biden created this crisis on day one when he signed his first 64 executive actions that have undermined border security and encouraged illegal immigration. Despite the unprecedented surge in illegal immigration, the Biden administration chose to deny that there was any problem at all. As a matter of fact, just 11 months in, they called it, quote, cyclical or seasonal. They continued to insist that the border is secure, about the 28-month mark. Even at the end of last year, President Biden and his administration officials continued to downplay the border crisis in month 37 as just, quote, ebbs and flows. But 2 weeks after calling it ebbs and flows, and nearly 3 years into this crisis of his own doing, President Biden finally admitted in month 37 that the border is, quote, not secure. We've known for years what President Biden and his administration refused to acknowledge until recently, that our southern border isn't secured. No laws have changed, just the will to enforce them. And while they've been in denial, we've seen fentanyl decimate our communities. We've seen people on the terrorist watch list stream across the southern border. We've seen state and local government budgets strain under the weight of providing food and shelter. We've seen crime and with illegal immigrants assaulting police and even committing rape or murder. Last month, 50 men and women from Indiana's National Guard deployed to Texas to support its efforts to do what the federal government refuses to do and enforce our border laws. Because the sad fact is that every state and every community has become a border state and a border community under President Biden's failed border policies. My question first to you, Mr. Blair. You spoke about your experiences trying to secure our border through the variety of roles that you have served in. Can you share how the Biden administration's policies worsened under this border crisis?
Sure, as a Border Patrol agent and an officer on the Operation Lone Star, by inviting so many people to the southern border that he has, it forces or coerces every single agency along the border to deal with that mass migration. And so because of that, the rest of the border is left wide open for other nefarious activities such as the Mexican cartels, such as Tren de Aragua coming up from Venezuela. All the other criminal activities are now happening between the ports of entry because of that. The record amount of fentanyl coming through, you name it.
Great. And as a follow-up, what national security threats are posed by the current situation at the southern border?
Yes, sir. So every single adversary that the United States has a nexus to our southern border. That is China, Iran, Venezuela, Russia, to include also non-state actors, Hezbollah, Hamas. You also have ISIS, MS-13, Tren de Aragua. Every single one now sees that the Mexican cartels now are in control, and now they have the ability to now move into every single community in the United States.
Thank you. And Mr. Smith, you have led the charge at the local level to protect your community and prosecute illegal immigrants. What hurdles have you faced in those efforts?
The logistics of prosecuting this many people are just overwhelming for a county my size. You know, Operation Lone Star really is the only thing standing in between the citizens of Kinney County and the open border policies of Biden. Listening to some of the questions here today, though, it seems like a lot of the emphasis is put on the immigrant welfare. But being a budget committee, y'all deal with taxpayer dollars. To me, there is a huge message being missed here. I'm astounded at what am I hearing today.
And how has your community changed as a result of President Biden's open border policies?
We no longer have a sovereign border. Our residents have to live in fear of hearing helicopters during the day, getting their kids in at night. You know, a lot of outside activities are very limited now. We've transformed our entire lives to live with a security threat.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would submit to you that the numbers don't lie. The numbers on this chart do not lie. President Biden created this crisis with the stroke of a pen. He can fix it with the stroke of a pen, and I call on him to do just that. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Indiana. Now yield 5 minutes to my friend from Oklahoma, Mr. Josh Burkeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding a hearing regarding the cost of illegal immigration. Alexander Hamilton once said, writing under the pen name of Lucius Crassus, he said, quote, "To admit foreigners indiscriminately to the rights of citizens the moment they put in our foot on our country would be nothing less than to admit the Grecian horse," think Trojan horse, "into the citadel of our liberty and sovereignty." He later said something similar, talking about these foreigners will generally be apt to bring with them attachments, ... goes on to say, it's unlikely they will bring with them that temperate love of liberty. Ms. Kirshner, you have talked about, we're granting the right of citizenship right now through the administration, the benefit of citizenship from those coming from Haiti and from Cuba. The moment they are paroled by this administration, I will submit as a member of the Homeland Security Committee, as we've prosecuted this case out of that committee, illegally in defiance of what federal statute, the moment they come in under what Secretary Mayorkas and what this administration has brought forth, they come in illegally. We are granting them citizenship-like status. Hamilton, I just read how Hamilton warned us about that. Can you speak to, again, what we are giving them in terms of Social Security numbers and the benefits? If you can, speak to that.
Yes, sir. The parolees that are let in, they
$30,000 a month.
Yes.
That's what our
And-
average is. That's
and they're more at the
$350,000 a
border.
year.
Those are the ones flown in, and there are more that are being
Those that are
pulled in
flown
at the
in.
border. They are treated, for the purpose of federal benefits programs, they are treated like legal permanent residents. So for most people, that's green card holders. And that means that on day one, they get work permits. Well, they have to apply, but they get work permits. They're eligible for Social Security numbers. They're eligible for Obamacare. And with the
I
social...
filed a bill on that, by the way. To
I'm
stop
sorry?
that. I joined a colleague in the Senate to file a bill to stop that
Oh,
madness
well,
on
thank you, sir.
them being eligible for Obamacare. Keep going.
And they're eligible for tax credits. I mean, we will give them back money when they file a
Refundable tax credits
Yes,
without
exactly.
tax liability.
Exactly. So when they do pay taxes, they will get it'll be a net gain for the migrant. So in 5 years, all of those parolees will be eligible for everything under the sun: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, TANF, food stamps, Social Security income, federal student aid. If your kid's going to college, they'll be eligible for federal government money to go to college.
And that's just the parolees. For
Yes.
time's sake, I want to kind of reclaim my time here and say that's just for the parolees, the $30,000 a month that this administration is granting that type of status to. But then you also have, once these children, these individuals, these illegal immigrants have children, then that child, then absent the parole release into the country, that also grants that family access that may not be paroled into these other benefits of food stamps and Medicaid. So I want to continue. Let me ask you something.
Yes, sir.
You were put in contrast with Cato a minute ago in terms of your numbers. Cato claims that the revenue brought in by illegal immigration is $1 trillion. You all are stating that the revenue brought in on an annual basis is $31 billion. That is quite the contrast. $1 trillion, Cato says, is the total to all benefits, the state, local, federal, $1 trillion in revenue, yet you all contend it's $31 billion. Cato says the benefits from illegal immigrants is $700 billion. You all say it's $180 billion. It's quite the contrast. Also, if you listen to Cato, they are to be pro-liberty. And one of the comments, I'm not recognizing you yet. You keep interrupting members of Congress, and it's been quite said to you, I've seen you in Homeland Security, and you've been asked to be a guest, and so I'd ask that you honor that. $31 billion compared to $1 trillion. Benefits, $700 billion versus $180 billion. That's unbelievable. So I'm going to break it down because I got 45 seconds. For anyone who would doubt your numbers or grant deference to Cato, break it down to the smallest sample size that we can look and we see numbers and the impact. Look at what's happening in New York. They are suggesting Eric Adams, the mayor of New York, said, brace yourself. This is all wide, all government services. He told them, brace yourself from 10 to 15% cuts. It's a Democrat mayor. So if there's such a positive benefit, then why isn't New York seeing that? Why are they having to tell all government service, brace yourself for 10 to 20% cuts? Ms. Kirsten, I will give you the last word on that.
Yes, sir. I think the difference is whether you're looking at a broader economic impact of GDP, or whether you're looking at the cost to the federal government, the cost to American taxpayers, which is what we're looking at. We're looking at the cost to American taxpayers. And this is being felt most acutely at the state and local level. And the National Academy of Sciences agreed on that as well, that this is something that the federal government, we're spending billions of dollars on it, and it's only going to increase as the numbers come in.
I yield, Mr.
I
Chairman.
thank the gentleman from Oklahoma and now yield to the gentlelady from Minnesota, Ms. Omar, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Peter, I want to give you a minute to respond.
I was just going to say that our numbers was not all illegal immigration. It was just total immigration, so all immigrants. So that's why it's not directly comparable. That's all I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's keep clarifying some points to better understand the true impacts of our immigration policies. Mr. Pierre, how has the restriction of legal pathways significantly increased reliance on asylum?
Well, look, I mentioned 3% of the people who are going through the green card process get a green card each year. So that right there tells you we're about 97% closed. People don't look at this as an option. People are going to die in these backlogs before they get green cards. And so, yeah, they look at it and they say, there's no way. This is not an option for me. And so they come to the border and they tell us that that's why they're coming. There's no visa category available to the people who are showing up at our southwest border.
Thank you for that clarity. Can you confirm that immigration policies that facilitate legal entry have reduced illegal entries? Yes or no?
Absolutely. The parole sponsorship programs that the administration rolled out have dramatically reduced the number of encounters of Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans. Even Venezuelans are down compared to what they were before these programs were announced.
Mm-hmm. And our Republican friends always say people can come here legally. Could you walk us through this Cato chart outlining the mess that our legal immigration system is?
Yeah, this is why 97% of the people who go through the process get excluded, because there are all these different restrictions in place. And you go through each one, there are multiple different categories here, obviously. Refugee program, you got one out of 100 million displaced people worldwide getting in. You have the diversity lottery. Again, it's a 0.2% chance of getting in through that. Family sponsorship, 9 million person backlog there. Again, you're going to die before you see a green card through that process. So you go through each one of these things, and you can see how restrictive it is. Ultimately, you end up in the employer-sponsored categories, and even those, the ones that are supposed to be for skilled and all about our economy and everything, even those are incredibly backlogged. Over 2 million people waiting for the opportunity to immigrate legally through those.
Yeah. And finally, in terms of real costs that we should be talking about, isn't it true that immigrants generally contribute more in taxes than they consume in public benefits?
That's right. Our report looks at all taxes and all benefits of all categories. We look at the entire budget for state, federal, and local governments, and we find $1 trillion in tax payments versus just $700 billion in benefits, $300 billion net gain from immigration.
And Mr. Pierre, is it fair to say that our debate around immigration often overlooks the actual facts and data needed to craft sensible policies?
Yeah, I think if we started with the premise that these people could be contributors, then we would ultimately craft a much more rational immigration policy than we have right now.
Maybe it's about something else entirely. I won't speculate on what that something else could be, but I hope that some of my colleagues will reflect on why the idea of immigration or the changing face of our country seems to unsettle them. We know that there are undeniable benefits to immigration. The real costs are rooted in poor policy decisions. Our restrictive and failed immigration policies are costing us not just economically and fiscally, but also harming global standing and dividing our communities. With something as complex as immigration, this discussion merits thoughtful consideration and not whatever this hearing is about. And I will just say, as an immigrant, on a personal note, when we arrived in the US in 1995, it took my dad about 2 weeks to find employment. He worked at the airport and then became a cab driver. We moved to Minnesota. He worked for the post office until he retired in 2010. I was expected to find a job to help support the family. So were all of my 6 siblings. All of us have been gainfully employed since we were 16 in this country. The idea that immigrants do not come to this country desperately searching to reach that American dream is ridiculous, and it's something that I find abhorrent that is constantly discussed as we come to this country to just be on public benefits when we desperately want to be as equal as every other person and be gainfully employed and live the American dream. Thank you, and I yield back.
I thank the gentlelady and now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Valadeo.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for testifying today to discuss the devastating cost the situation at our southern border is having on communities across the country. The issue at our southern border is complex, but one aspect that demands urgent attention is the influx of illicit drugs, particularly fentanyl. I've heard countless times from communities and law enforcement in my district about the devastating rise of this drug and the cost it has on individual safety, law enforcement, and public health. I want to start by going over a few statistics. In 2020, more than 5,000 Californians lost their lives due to opioid overdose, and 80% of those deaths were directly attributed to fentanyl. In 2021, fentanyl-related overdose deaths surged by 54%. Last year, California seized a record amount of fentanyl, 62,000 pounds, enough to kill the global population twice over. These alarming increases in seizures and over 1,000% increase since 2021 underscores the severity of the crisis. As we discussed the cost that the open southern border has had on our local law enforcement who are on the front lines of this crisis, we need to remember that these statistics represent lives lost, families shattered, and communities in distress. Our nation's officers deserve our unwavering support as they grapple with this crisis, allocating precious time and resources to combat fentanyl while striving to keep our neighborhoods safe. Responding to overdose calls investigating drug trafficking, ensuring the public is safe from drug-related crimes and violence demand significant resources and stretch our local agencies very thin. These are resources that could otherwise be allocated to community policing, crime prevention, enhancing emergency services. It is our duty to combat this crisis with every tool at our disposal. So I want to thank you all again for taking the time to discuss this significant issue. But I want to direct my question directly to Mr. Smith and Mr. Blair. Can both of you touch on the cost that illegal drug flow from the southern border continues to place on our local law enforcement and communities?
Unfortunately, because we're dealing with mass amounts of illegal immigration at the southern border, most of our assets, to include resources, are now geared towards that. So a lot of the apprehensions, unfortunately, when it comes to narcotics and everything else, is happening with the Texas DPS or local law enforcement. Maybe that's on Operation Stone Garden or whatnot. So unfortunately, the local law enforcement is now having to deal with Mexican cartels or foreign terrorist organizations, while the federal government is facilitating the invasion.
You know, the resources in Kinney County and other counties along the border are beyond stretched thin. They've been broken. Our EMS is broken. We have a volunteer fire department. It's broken. Counties are broken. Communities are broken. People's lives are being devastated. Y'all deal with taxpayer funding dollars, which are some people here want to legislate not for their benefit. The taxpayers are the ones that fund this building, that pay for these tax dollars. Legislation should be implemented toward them. And I think this border crisis really simplifies down to a simple issue. When you don't enforce a law, people don't tend to follow it. And if we enforced our laws, our border would be secure, Americans would be safer, and many of the deaths that we've seen wouldn't have occurred. That's all I have to say on the subject.
No, I appreciate that. That's, and the mention of the cartels, that's something I think a lot of people forget to mention. I've got a community that was in my district before redistricting, and Mendota, California, it was an issue with this little tiny community, could barely afford to even have an entire police department, and they were dealing with MS-13 and having to bring in state, local, and federal resources to try to combat some of these issues they were dealing with, and it is all related to what's going on the border, and it continues to add pressure on a lot of folks, but the fentanyl side of it is just one that really needs to be addressed, obviously, and I know there's a lot of concern there. But then also, I think some comments were made earlier by Mr. Beer that on the process of immigration, I mean, I come from a family of immigrants. My mom and dad immigrated here. And so obviously immigration is something that's very close to heart for me, but we have to have a process that works. And we have to have a process that allows those who want to come here legally go through that process and play and I think for the most part, a really good role in what our country is and has become is because people from all over the world see what we are and they want to be a part of that. But we have to have a process that works, and I think that would help relieve some of the pressure on the border. But the drug situation is just one that you can't overlook anymore, and the cost it's having in our local communities is just something that has to be addressed as quickly as possible. So thank you, Chairman, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and now yield to my friend from California, Mr. Scott Peters, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Back home in San Diego, generally, we know that the border is an opportunity, not a threat. In our region, San Diego, Tijuana, binational region alone, more than 150,000 people cross the border every day to shop, to go to school, to work, or visit the doctor. It's the busiest port of entry in the Western Hemisphere. But we also acknowledge that we can't enjoy the benefits of cross-border commerce unless we manage our border responsibly, and we need to make improvements. And right now, we have community-based organizations that are trying to pick up the slack so that we can deal with the newcomers that are coming to the U.S. to do all the terrific things that Mr. Beers pointed out. These organizations, along with the County of San Diego, are doing their best to provide basic services to some of the most vulnerable people, but they're dipping into their own pockets to fill the gaps. And Democrats know that we need more resources at the southern border, but the problem is that there's folks in this building who'd rather campaign on the chaos than do anything to stop it. Recall that Speaker Johnson said there would be no foreign aid unless there was border security. And there was a deal. It took 4 months to come up with it in the Senate. We had a very conservative senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford, a very liberal senator from Connecticut, Senator Murphy, and the deal maker in the Senate, Senator Sinema, worked for 4 months to come up with a deal, and they reached a deal. that would have included more than $20 billion for border security. What was in there? 1,500 more Border Patrol and Customs officers, 1,200 more ICE personnel, 16,000 more detention beds, 100 new immigration judges, 4,300 more asylum officers, and a change in the asylum definition that would have made asylum tougher to achieve. And 100 fentanyl-specific inspection machines for the southern border that are otherwise sitting in the warehouse waiting for us to authorize them. People complain about fentanyl. We're ready to deal with that. And an automatic border shutoff if there's over 8,000 immigrants in a day or 5,000 average over 7 days. No discretion. The border be shut, right? That was all part of the deal. According to Senator Murphy, he had about 20, he thought he could get 25 Republican votes in the Senate. There was some nervousness about supporting Ukraine among some of the Republican senators, but that bill would have passed overwhelmingly and would have ensured the availability of additional immigrant visas to help the kind of legal immigration that we all acknowledge we need. What happened was Mr. Trump decided he'd rather campaign on the issue than solve the issue. He told those Republican senators, don't vote for this on a Sunday night, and in the next morning, on the Monday, the number of Republicans supporting it went from 20 to 25 down to 3. There was no vote in the Senate. President Biden would have signed that bill, the toughest border bill in history. A lot of Democrats would have had a hard time voting for that, frankly. But because there was nothing about Dreamers, nothing about all the things that Democrats have been trying to deal with, path to citizenship, didn't deal with immigration, just with border security. Just with border security. That bill, by the way, is still available for Mr. Johnson to bring to the House floor and force a vote on if he's serious about doing something about it. But instead, we have these academic hearings, not just in this committee, about complaining about what's happening as though we don't have the agency as members of Congress to fix it. So let's pull that bill off the shelf. Let's all force a vote on it. Let's see if Republicans will support it, because President Biden, it can't be responsible. This is not a President Biden if it's President Trump who killed it. This is Trump who did this, okay? And we have every ability in this building to solve this problem. We were elected to office. President Trump isn't even in office now, but he appears to be able to push around the Republicans, at least in the Senate. If my Republican colleagues want to do something about border security, fine, let's do it. Let's put that bill on the House floor. Speaker Johnson owns the House floor. He owns the time for it. He could do it next week. And if you're serious about it, let's vote on it. But if you're not serious about it, you just want to campaign on it, let's fess up to that. You want to just have this chaos, not you. Some people want to have this chaos to campaign on. They'd rather campaign on the issue than solve the issue. That's not why I came to Congress. That's not why people sent us. Let's vote on it. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from California and yield 5 minutes now to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Ben Klein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. It's important that we take opportunities like today to zero in on the cost of the Biden border crisis, because without the leadership of the chairman, if we weren't in the majority, if House Republicans weren't in the majority, hearings like this would never happen. We know that the other side would not be focused on securing our border. And for all the talk about some Senate bill that didn't pass the Senate, so I don't know what shelf the speaker's going to pull the bill off of, because it's not a shelf that's in the House of Representatives. It's a bill that can't pass the Senate. So meanwhile, our Senate counterparts, as they talk, they've held at least 16 hearings related to climate change, but only one hearing on immigration, to try and gloss over the disastrous effects of the policies pushed by the White House. This White House that refuses to follow current law. So we can talk a lot about changing policies, but until we have a president that actually follows the law with regard to parole, with regard to detention, I mean, we have laws that are currently in effect, but this president refuses to follow them. This Homeland Security Secretary was impeached because he ignored the law. And the American people are seeing straight through the obfuscation and the blustering on the other side. They know who's responsible for this crisis, and they're frustrated because they're the ones left having to pay for the consequences. And the consequences are real. The last time I was in Yuma, Arizona, and as we know, about 85% of the fresh wintertime produce is grown in Yuma. We met with farmers, farmers who were testifying about illegal immigrants who come across the border, who tromp across their crops, who camp in their fields, and they're not allowed, because of U.S. food safety laws, thankfully, that they are not allowed to harvest or sell that. They have to destroy it at the cost to the farmer. And so then we went to visit with a hospital in Yuma. We visited a NICU. The neonatal facility was talking about how they have a certain number of beds, but that those beds are often full of illegals, forcing residents of Yuma to have to go to Phoenix to get care, hours away. And that's because, tragically, the incentives for people to make this journey are so strong because they can cross the border unimpeded, that these women are sexually assaulted, raped on the way up here. They get pregnant. They don't receive any kind of prenatal care. And so inevitably, they are giving birth early. They are premature. They go into labor prematurely. They have to have a NICU available in Yuma when they get here. And so they take up the space. So then we talk about the schools, the cost to the school divisions for not just because you have an additional student in the classroom, but because that student is ESL. So you have those added costs. Then you have the transportation system, the bus system. Then you have the housing impact, the rental impact. What is the impact on rents when you have a limited number of housing units available, low-cost housing, but that impact. So just when you're talking about Yuma, and it is right on the border, so we looked at the fencing, the holes in the fencing. When we went, actually on our bus ride to the border, all of a sudden cars started weaving in and out of our convoy because we had Capitol Police in front and behind us. They were slowing us down to a 5-mile-an-hour crawl on a highway. We said, what is going on? It was the cartels operating freely on our side of the border, trying to determine what this was. And is it something that should be allowed, should stop? By the time we got to the fence, no more than 10 minutes later, 15 minutes later, that part of the border was clear. But we could see across the river the school buses idling. They were waiting with migrants waiting to cross, and the cartels are in complete control. So I can't even begin to talk about the cascading impact on costs to this country, but every country is becoming, every state is becoming a border state, every community is becoming a border community. Mine has an interstate running through it, and if you talk to the state police about what they pull over every day on that interstate, operating illegally, human trafficking, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, it is an epidemic. And until we get a handle on it, these crises are going to continue. So I appreciate you holding this hearing, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate our witnesses being here today, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Virginia, and with our final witness from the great state of Texas, Mr. Chip Roy.
I thank my friend, the chairman. I thank him for holding this hearing, and I appreciate the witnesses being here and giving your time here. Mr. Blair, you serve in the United States military. You serve in the Border Patrol. You spent over 20 years of your life doing that now here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Can you explain for the record whether or not you believe H.R. 2 would effectively secure the border versus the Senate bill, which in my opinion, to see if you agree with it, would actually codify catch and release and codify alternative detention such that it would codify the current broken system? Can you quickly answer that?
Yes, sir. As H.R. 2, along with your other bill designating Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, both those bills would secure the border. The other would not. It would actually allow the Mexican cartels to continue to smuggle and continue to have a slave trade in the United States.
I appreciate that. Mr. Smith from Kinney County, could you explain, I know you already went through in your testimony, I just want to make sure the record is very clear. Kinney County, you have gone from prior to the Biden administration. I've heard all of this testimony here today saying, or questions from my colleagues saying, oh, nothing's different. There's, everything's all just perfectly fine under Biden. We've heard testimony that says, oh, they're doing more, removals. And just speak to the actual on the ground. Kinney County, Texas, not some ivory tower sitting in Washington, D.C., where you put out papers and sit in think tanks and talk about how, wonderful things would be in theory. In Kinney County, Texas, did you go from 140 crimes, roughly, prior to the Biden administration to now something like 6,700 crimes last year?
Absolutely. That's going to be criminal trespass, evading arrest on foot, human trafficking, human smuggling, criminal mischief. And to speak on the Senate bill, I deal with Republicans and Democrats on the border. The only Democrats I've heard from that support that are here in Washington, D.C. The Democrats on the border don't support the Senate bill, but the ones here do.
I'm just wondering, you probably no doubt have either met with the family or know the family of the people who died because the emergency services were not available to them because they were being used to go deal with people who are here illegally because of our broken system that the Democrats refuse to actually deal with at our border. Is that family interested in reading, studies from think tanks in D.C. about, what we need to do with our immigration system and free markets?
No, they want their relative back that's died. That's what they want.
Ms. Kirshner, are you familiar with the quote from Milton Friedman that you cannot simultaneously have free immigration and a welfare state?
Yes, sir.
Right. Do you believe we have a welfare state?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that welfare state attracts people from all over the world?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that welfare state is expensive?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that under our current law in the United States Supreme Court under Plyler v. Doe that the people of Texas have to pay through their taxes to fund people getting an education whether they're here legally or not?
Yes, sir.
Question, do you believe that, and can you testify on the record here that I'm correct, that there's roughly 51.5 million people here in the United States who are foreign born?
That's about right. Yes, sir.
Is that about 15 to 16% of the American population?
Yes, sir.
Is that the highest percentage that we've ever had as a percentage of our population since we've been counting it, going back well into the early part of the 19th century?
I think we've just hit historic highs.
Correct. We've now surpassed current highs, and that is not really accounting for the most recent numbers piling in over the last year. That 51.5 million, has that been bolstered by roughly about 1 million people, a little less than 1 million, want to be factually accurate, 900 and something thousand on average per year legally coming into the United States, legal permanent residents over the last roughly 25 years?
Yes, sir.
Right. In other words, do we, as some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle like to say, have a closed door or an impossible way for people to come to the United States? Do we not, in fact, have we not allowed almost 25 million people legally to come into the United States over the last 2.5 decades?
Yes, sir. We have a legal system. We have a legal way to come to the United States. It's called a green card.
And right now, under our current system, are the laws being ignored by the current administration?
Yes, sir.
And this notion that people flowing across the border, I heard one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about the benefits of parole, that somehow that was fixing the system. Is that not, in fact, a backdoor way to dump more people into the United States rather than having them visibly come across the border, enraging the American people rightfully, and rather fly them into the United States to the tune of 400,000 people last year, including the state of Texas and the state of Florida, and fly them into the country under parole when the law requires a case-by-case analysis? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Parole has become a shadow immigration system. It's essentially supplanting the family and employment-based systems. They've created a completely separate system for hundreds of thousands of people who have no legal basis to enter this country.
Well, I appreciate you all testifying here, and I would just say that if people want to submit reports, maybe they should send those reports to the families and the victims of the people who have been dying, like the 6 families who died from fentanyl poisoning in my school district, or Lake and Riley's family in Georgia, who I'm sure would be delighted to read about all of the studies about what we could do with our immigration system when we've in fact been putting forward legislation to fix that immigration system, but our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are not interested in that while numbers continue to flood across the border. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to submit 34 affidavits from Kinney County landowners regarding the impact of border crisis on their properties, safety, and livelihood.
Without objection, so ordered.
I thank the chairman.
Thank the gentleman from Texas, and now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Buddy Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here, and thank you for your expertise and your interest in what I consider to be one of the most pressing problems that we have in our country today, and that is the border situation at the southwest border and the porous border. Look, I've been in Congress for 10 years. I've been to the border 8 times in that 10 years that I've been a member of Congress. The last time was about 2 months ago. It's in as bad a shape now as I've ever seen it in the 8 times that I've been there. I'm a pharmacist by profession, so I'm obviously concerned about the number of immigrants who are coming across that border, but I'm also concerned, and even probably more concerned, about the illegal drugs coming across that border, particularly fentanyl that's poisoning our communities. You know, every day we lose over 200 people as a result of fentanyl poisoning. I want to share a story with you real quick. As I said, I'm a pharmacist, a healthcare professional, and I embarrassed myself at a town hall meeting one day. And I was embarrassed to have made the mistake I made. I referred to it as fentanyl addiction. And a mother stood up and she said, "No, sir, you're wrong. It's not addiction." She said, "My son took one pill and he's dead. It's fentanyl poisoning." And that is exactly what it is. We've made some progress in some of the tools in our tool chest. I led a letter to the FDA asking them to reclassify naloxone to where you could get it without a prescription. Now, I'm often critical of the FDA for good reason, I think, but I have to applaud them in this case because they did just that. I keep naloxone with me. I keep it in my backpack everywhere I go. Thank God I've never had to use it, but I know that it is there if I ever have to use it. We all know the statistics. Since President Biden took office, over 60,000 pounds of fentanyl have been intercepted at our borders. That's what's been intercepted. We have no idea what has gone through those borders without us knowing it. In fact, I will tell you, I mentioned the last time I was at the Border Patrol agents told me that two things that I didn't know before. First of all, the number of non-Mexicans crossing that border now exceeds the number of Mexicans crossing that border. Secondly, and this is what disturbed me the most, the street price of fentanyl has plummeted. It has gone from $10 a tablet down to 25 and 35 cents a tablet, which is simple economics. That is supply and demand. The demand's still there, but the supply of fentanyl on the streets right now is so high that the price has plummeted. This is a national emergency. This is something we have got to address and save Americans, 200 every day. And everyone here, everyone in this room knows someone who's been impacted by this. Either you have a family member or you know of someone who's been impacted by this. That's what's really got me concerned. Ms. Kirshner, I want to ask you, given your experience with DHS and with the Border Patrol, how has the current border policies contributed to the rise in fentanyl trafficking and drug trafficking as a whole?
Well, sir, the Biden administration has focused very heavily on releasing illegal migrants, and that has driven this mass wave of immigration through Central America, through Mexico. But what's coming with it, I mean, all of these people are paying cartels. And they're all playing cartels, and their cartels are becoming richer and richer. And we know that the cartels use human beings to divert resources so that they can bring in their shipments in other areas of the border. So it's interesting you asked that question because when I first started working in immigration over 20 years ago, I had border agents tell me, no, the two are separate. Smuggling aliens is different than drug trafficking, and they were very different, and now it is all combined. It's one big, lucrative, illegal, toxic operation, and we are paying the price as Americans.
Right. Thank you for that. Let me move on. Mr. Blair, I want to ask you, we know that on the federal side, we spend roughly $1 billion a year incarcerating illegal immigrants. Do you know how much the money the state of Texas and its localities spend on the same issue? Any idea?
Sir, I do not. I can find out for you, but I do not know that number.
I appreciate that. Let me ask you, Mr. Smith, has the increase in drug smuggling impacted the public safety of your community?
It has. You know, the amount of law enforcement it takes to respond to incidents.
And I suspect the emergency personnel carry naloxone with them, and they have to use it quite often. It's not inexpensive.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I can't thank all of you enough for being here, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, because this is a national emergency. You know, if we had a plane crash today and it killed 200 people, we'd stop every airplane that was flying in this country until we figured out what went wrong. Yet we lose 200 people every day to fentanyl poisoning, and what happens? Nothing whatsoever. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia. I thank the patience and contributions of our witnesses. In conclusion, I'd like to make a couple of brief comments, and I'll try not to give another speech. When I think about this administration and what is emblematic of this administration with respect to immigration enforcement and border security, I think about Ms. Kamala Harris, our vice president. She was designated as the border czar. She was in charge for the administration. And I remember her as a presidential candidate along with the other Democrat presidential candidates when asked the question about the current border situation. She, along with every Democrat candidate, raised their hand when asked, should we decriminalize border crossings? She also raised her hand along with the others when asked if we should provide, quote, free services. They're not free. But should we provide health care? And she raised her hand. It's like the maxim your granddad taught you growing up. When people tell you who they are, believe them. And I believe they are, for whatever reason and rationale, for an open border. I think the greatest cost of that is much deeper and more profound than just the financial cost, the dollars and cents. No question about it. And I won't go through the litany of things associated with those costs because I'm trying my best to stay focused on the Budget Committee's jurisdiction with respect to the financial impact. I put a premium on freedom. I know Cato puts a premium on freedom. I think the fact that the United States has put a premium on freedom is the reason that you see unlocked and unleashed human potential like no other country in the history of humanity. But what I would say to my guest, Mr. Beer especially, if you're not enforcing the laws, and this president has not done that, willfully, intentionally, systematically, if he has not done all that he can do, and in fact, I think he's undone things with respect to, but if he's not doing everything he can do to provide for a common defense and secure our sovereign border, there is no freedom. Rule of law is essential, and security is essential to the freedom and quality of lives of the American people. Yes, there were problems with our border and with immigration enforcement before this president. And yes, both sides of the aisle will have to come together to fix some of these deficiencies in our current immigration system. But the crisis today, the lawlessness and chaos at our border is different than anything we've experienced, and it could have been avoided. It is self-inflicted, and it is actually one of the reasons why it's very difficult to have a bipartisan, productive conversation to reach some good outcomes that would, in fact, make the system work better. So I think that that's a big observation of mine because I, too, am a champion for freedom. But what's happening in Kinney County? If you asked how freedom's working out for the citizens of my fellow Texans in Kinney County and 253 of the other counties in Texas, they'd say there is no American freedom the way we knew it before. They don't go to their ranches anymore, and they don't leave their kids and their wives at the ranch anymore. They're fearful of their lives. That isn't the American way. That isn't liberty as we have held it out to the rest of the world. But yes, legal immigration, good. Labor shortage, hardworking, God-fearing, freedom-loving people from all over the world coming for a slice of the American dream. You better believe it. That's the American story. It really is. All I would say is, I welcome those folks, and I would be in their shoes fighting tooth and nail to get to this country, this experiment in liberty and democracy. But I only welcome them if they respect our laws, the safety of our citizens, and the sovereignty of our country. And that is our constitutional sacred duty. And in this hearing, we're just trying to identify the financial cost. And it's real. And for a federal government that prints money and borrows money without any thought, it's hard to suggest that there's a consequence to anything we do. Funding foreign countries' security, funding expansions of healthcare. I mean, as long as there's no immediate consequence, or you're not taking tax dollars out of their pocket or cutting someone's favorite program, it's just such an irrational system up here. The best way, I think, to look at a rational system and observe what it's doing is to look at those places around the country, which is every place but the federal government, where they have to actually balance their books. They have to make the ledger balance. So they either raise taxes or cut expenditures to absorb the cost. Man, that's why people are yelling from the rooftops, help us. We're overwhelmed and we're overrun. Because they don't say that in this town as long as China and other bondholders will say, here's some more money for this insatiable appetite to spend. I appreciate you, Mr. Beard, and I appreciate your testimony, and I appreciate your back and forth. And I always appreciate my colleagues on both sides having a good, robust, productive conversation. Mr. Smith, thanks for making the trip up here from Kenny County. Tell my friends out there hello. Mr. Blair, thanks for your service to our country. And Ms. Kirchner, thank you for all the work that you all did as the basis for our discussion in terms of the financial cost of our open border and this border crisis. With that, God bless you all. God bless our great country. We are adjourned. Sorry. I'm going to also submit, if I can, since I've adjourned, but I want to submit a letter of support from Sheena Rodriguez, President of Alliance for Safe Texas, and then another study from the Federation of American Immigration Forum that has formed the basis, again, of today's hearing. And I obviously don't object, and I so order, and now we are convened.
Thank you.
Yep.